Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Sam Thornfield, and I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 17 years. In all that time, I never lost anyone to the old mines. Not once. That record meant everything to me, especially knowing what happened to my daddy back in 1952. I was 12 when the mine took him. Shaft collapse, they said. Nothing left to bury, just an empty casket and a mining helmet that still sits on my kitchen table. That's why I became a ranger instead of following him underground. Someone had to keep folks away from those death traps. October 15th, 1971 started like any other morning. Coffee black as coal, bacon crispy, and the radio crackling with weather reports. Early frost had killed most of the leaves, leaving the mountains looking like old bones against the gray sky. I was fixing to check the seals on mine shaft #3 when the call came in. "Sam, we got a problem," said Deputy Morrison from town. 3 college kids went missing up in Coal Hollow, geology students from the university. Their professor expected them back yesterday. My stomach dropped. Coal Hollow was the worst section of my territory. 47 sealed mine shafts scattered across 10 square miles of scarred earth. I'd posted warning signs everywhere, but young folks always thought they knew better. "When were they last seen?" I asked, already grabbing my gear. 2 days ago. Camped near the old #7 shaft. Their professor found their site this morning. Tents torn up, equipment scattered around. Looks like they tried to break into the mine. I drove up the winding mountain road, my truck groaning on the steep grades. The October air smelled wrong, too much sulfur seeping up from the old workings underground. As I got closer to Coal Hollow, I noticed something else. No birds, no insects. Nothing alive making any sound at all. The students' campsite sat in a clearing about 50 yards from mine shaft #7. I'd sealed that entrance myself just 3 months ago, steel plates bolted tight over concrete. But when I got out of my truck, I felt the hair on my neck stand up. The steel plates were bent outward. From the inside, I walked closer, boots crunching on dead leaves. Fresh crowbar marks scarred the metal, and I could see where someone had worked hard to pry an opening big enough to crawl through. But those marks, they started from inside the tunnel and worked outward, like something had been trying to get out, not in. "That ain't possible," I muttered, running my fingers over the twisted steel. I'd welded those plates myself. Nothing could bend them like that from inside a sealed mine. The students' gear lay scattered in a wide circle. Backpacks emptied, food trampled into the dirt. One tent looked like it had been slashed from the inside, long tears in the fabric that couldn't have been made by any animal I knew. The other tent was just gone. Not moved or dragged away. Gone completely, like it never existed. I found their notebooks near the mine entrance. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. Heard sounds from inside sealed mine. Investigating possible gas pocket explanations. The handwriting got sloppy toward the end, like whoever wrote it was shaking. I tried my radio. Nothing but static. Cell phone showed no signal. That was normal, this deep in the mountains, but something about the silence felt heavy, pressing down on my chest like the weight of all that rock underground. The mine entrance yawned black and cold. Temperature near the opening had to be 15 degrees colder than the clearing. My breath came out in little puffs as I peered inside with my flashlight. The beam seemed to get swallowed up after about 20 feet, not lighting near as much as it should. That's when I heard it. Faint but clear as day, the sound of pickaxes hitting rock, echoing up from deep underground. Steady rhythm, like men working a coal face. But mineshaft #7 had been abandoned since 1954. Nobody had worked those tunnels in 17 years. I stood there listening, my daddy's old mining helmet heavy in my hands. The sounds stopped as soon as I noticed them. Like whatever was down there knew I was listening. The silence that followed felt alive somehow, waiting. Professional training told me to call for backup, seal the entrance again, and wait for a proper rescue team. But those kids were down there somewhere, and every minute counted in a mine. I'd seen too many good people die underground to waste time on paperwork. I strapped on my helmet, checked my gear, and squeezed through the bent opening into the darkness below. The last thing I saw before the tunnel swallowed my flashlight beam was something carved into the rock beside the entrance. Symbols I didn't recognize, cut fresh and deep into the stone. They looked like warnings. The tunnel air tasted like metal and old death. My flashlight cut through the darkness ahead, but the beam seemed weak, like the mountain was drinking up the light. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing like a gunshot. I'd been in plenty of abandoned mines before. They all felt dead, cold rock and stale air, nothing more. But this place felt different. Alive. Like something was breathing just beyond the reach of my light. The main tunnel sloped down at a steep angle. My boots slipped on loose rock and coal dust that should have settled decades ago. According to my maps, this shaft went down 300 feet before branching into a network of smaller tunnels. If the students were exploring, they could be anywhere in that maze. 20 feet in, I found the first sign they'd been here. Sarah Morrison's student ID card, lying in a perfect circle of disturbed dust. No footprints leading to it or away from it. Just the card, like someone had placed it there for me to find. "Hello," I called into the darkness. "Sarah, Tom, Jenny, can you hear me?" My voice echoed back wrong. Instead of fading, it seemed to multiply, bouncing off walls that shouldn't exist. The echoes lasted too long, twisting into sounds that almost seemed like voices calling back, but not the students' voices. Older voices, rougher, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I kept going deeper. The tunnel curved to the right, following the coal seam the way they'd dug it 60 years ago. My grandfather had probably walked this same path when he was young. Maybe my daddy too, before the war. At the 50-foot mark, my radio crackled to life. Static mostly, but underneath it I could swear I heard voices, faint and far away, like they were coming from the bottom of a well. "Help us. So cold down here. Can't find the way out." I keyed the mic. "This is Ranger Thornfield. If you can hear me, stay where you are and keep talking. I'm coming to get you." The voices stopped. Dead silence on all frequencies. That's when I noticed my watch. When I'd entered the mine, it read 2:30 p.m. Now it showed 4:45, but I couldn't have been underground for more than 20 minutes. Time moved differently down here, like the mountain had its own rules. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber carved from solid rock. My light swept across timber supports that looked fresh cut despite being installed before I was born. No rot, no sagging. They could have been put in yesterday. In the center of the chamber, I found their camp. 3 sleeping bags arranged in a perfect triangle. Coleman lantern sitting unlit in the middle. Canned food stacked in neat piles, labels all facing the same direction. Everything organized like they were planning to stay for weeks, not just exploring for an afternoon. But no students. I called their names again. This time, something answered. The pickaxe sound started up again, echoing from deeper in the mine. Steady rhythm, like a dozen men working in perfect time. But there was something wrong with the sound. It was too sharp, too clean. Real mining work was messy, chaotic. This sounded practiced, rehearsed. I followed the sounds down a side tunnel barely wide enough for my shoulders. The walls here were different. Smooth stone instead of rough-cut rock. Strange symbols covered every surface, carved deep and filled with some kind of phosphorescent material that gave off a sick green glow. The symbols hurt to look at directly. They seemed to move in my peripheral vision, rearranging themselves when I wasn't paying attention. One looked like a man with his arms raised. Another showed what might have been a pickaxe or maybe a cross. The largest one, right at eye level, looked like an open mouth screaming. That's when I found the first body. He sat propped against the tunnel wall, still wearing his mining clothes. The fabric was rotted through, but the man inside looked fresh, like he'd died yesterday instead of decades ago. His miner's helmet sat beside him, the headlamp still glowing with a cold blue light that had no business working after all these years. A brass nameplate on his helmet read, "William Thornfield, 1952. My daddy." I dropped to my knees beside him, hands shaking. He looked exactly like I remembered, maybe a little older. The same weathered face, the same calloused hands. But his skin was cold as the mountain stone, and when I touched his shoulder, his head rolled toward me with eyes like chips of coal. His mouth moved. No breath, no voice, but his lips formed words I could read clearly. "Run, boy. They're coming up from the deep places." The pickaxe sounds stopped. All at once, like someone had thrown a switch. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Footsteps. Dozens of them, coming up the tunnel behind me. Work boots on stone, moving in perfect rhythm. I grabbed my light and turned around. The tunnel was full of miners. They stood shoulder to shoulder, filling the passage from floor to ceiling. All wearing the same rotted work clothes, all carrying the same rusted tools. Their helmet lamps glowed with that same cold blue light, creating a constellation of dead stars in the darkness. At their head stood a man I'd never seen before, but somehow knew. Tall as a tree, wearing a foreman's hat and carrying a clipboard that looked like it was made of human skin. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding coal. "Samuel Thornfield," he said, "we've been waiting for you. Your shift starts now." The miners began to move forward, and I ran. I ran through tunnels that shouldn't exist, following paths that weren't on any map I'd ever seen. Behind me, the sound of work boots on stone kept perfect time, never getting closer but never falling back. They were herding me, driving me deeper into the mountain where the real work was done. My flashlight flickered and went out, but somehow I could still see. The walls themselves gave off that sick green glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. The symbols carved into the rock were moving now, no doubt about it, rearranging themselves into new patterns as I passed. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, so big my light wouldn't reach the far walls when it worked. And it was full of miners. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. All working the coal face with picks and shovels, loading cars that ran on tracks, leading even deeper underground. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, like they were all part of the same machine. The sound of their work echoed through the chamber. Metal on rock, wheels on rails, the creak and groan of timber under strain. But they weren't mining coal, they were mining people. Bodies hung from the chamber walls like sides of meat. Some fresh, some old enough to be bones. All of them wearing mining gear, all of them still moving slightly, like they were trying to work even in death. Their helmet lights created a network of blue stars across the cavern ceiling. In the center of it all, I found the students. Sarah, Tom, and Jenny stood at the base of a massive coal seam, picking at the rock face with tools that looked older than the mountain itself. Their movements matched the rhythm of all the other workers. Steady, mechanical, never stopping. They'd been down here for 2 days, but their clothes looked like they'd been working for years. "Sarah," I called out. "Tom, Jenny, it's Ranger Thornfield. I'm here to get you out." Sarah turned toward me. Her face was pale as bone, her eyes black as coal. When she spoke, her voice echoed like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Can't stop working, Ranger. The foreman says we got a quota to meet. Been behind schedule since 1952. Daddy's been waiting for us to catch up." She pointed to a section of the chamber I hadn't seen before. A raised platform where that giant foreman stood watching his workers. And beside him, wearing the same rotted mining clothes as all the rest, was my father. He waved at me with a hand that was more bone than flesh. His voice carried across the chamber clear as day, even though his lips barely moved. "Join us, son. The work's good here. Steady pay, steady hours, and we're all together. One big, happy family." The foreman stepped forward, his footsteps shaking the ground. Up close, I could see he wasn't quite human, too tall, too thin. His skin looked like it was carved from coal, and his eyes glowed with the same blue light as the helmet lamps. When he smiled, his teeth were sharp as pickaxe points. "Samuel Thornfield," he said in that grinding coal voice, "son of William Thornfield, grandson of James Thornfield. 3 generations of your family have worked these tunnels. Time to honor the family tradition." He held out a mining helmet identical to the ones everyone else wore. The nameplate was already engraved, "Samuel Thornfield, 1971. Your father volunteered to stay," the foreman continued. "Took the place of a dozen other souls who would have been called. But the debt's not paid. The mountain's hungry, boy. It needs workers. Good, honest workers who know the value of a day's labor." I looked around the chamber. All those miners, all those bodies, decades of disappearances, generations of families torn apart. The Cherokee had been right all along. The mountain was hungry, and the mines were its mouth. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The foreman's grin got wider. "Simple trade. You take your father's place on the work gang, and I'll let the students go. They can walk right out of here, never remember what they saw. Go back to their safe little lives above ground. I looked at the students, still picking at the rock face with mechanical precision. They'd been here 2 days, and already looked half dead. Another week, and they'd be just another set of bones hanging from the chamber walls. But if I stayed, if I took my father's place, there's got to be another way, I said. The foreman shook his massive head. Mountains got rules, boy. Been the same rules since the Cherokee first warned your people about digging too deep. Disturb the sacred places, you pay the price. Your mining companies took millions of tons of coal from these mountains, carved up the earth, poisoned the streams, killed the forests. That debt's got to be paid. The workers had stopped their mining. Hundreds of dead eyes turned toward me, waiting to see what I'd choose. My father stepped down from the platform, his work boots making no sound on the stone floor. It ain't so bad, son, he said. Work's honest. Company's good. And when your time's up, you get to go home. Eventually. How long? I asked. The foreman consulted his clipboard, made of skin. Let's see. Your family's debt runs pretty deep. Your great-grandfather was one of the first to dig here. Your grandfather took out about 1,000 tons over his career. Your father got 300 before his accident, I'd say. Oh, couple hundred years should about cover it. 200 years of mining in the dark. 200 years of picking at coal faces while my body rotted away. But the students would go free. They'd get to live normal lives, maybe even make something good out of them. I was reaching for the helmet when I heard something that changed everything. Singing. Faint at first, but getting stronger. An old Cherokee chant. Words I didn't understand, but rhythm I felt in my bones. The sound came from somewhere above us, filtering down through the rock. The foreman's expression changed. For the first time, he looked worried. That's not possible, he growled. The barriers were broken, the protections were destroyed when they started digging. The singing got louder. And with it came something else. Footsteps on stone. But these were different from the mechanical march of the dead miners. These had life in them. Purpose. A voice echoed down from the tunnels above. An old woman's voice, strong and clear. Samuel Thornfield, you hold on down there. Help's coming. The foreman roared, a sound like a mine collapse. Kill them. Kill them all before they can complete the ritual. The dead miners turned from their work and began moving toward the tunnel entrances. But their movements were slower now, less coordinated. The singing was doing something to them, breaking the foreman's control. I saw my chance and took it. The old Cherokee woman came down the main tunnel like she owned the place. Had to be 70 years old, but she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Behind her came 2 younger men carrying bundles of sage and what looked like mining equipment from my grandfather's era. Mary Stonecrow, she said, extending her hand to me. Cherokee Nation. Been watching these mountains for 50 years, waiting for someone with the sense to listen. The foreman towered over all of us, but he kept his distance from the old woman. The dead miners had stopped their advance, caught between their master's orders and something stronger. You have no power here, witch, the foreman spat. The barriers are broken. The sacred places are defiled. This mountain belongs to me now. Mary smiled, and it was not a nice expression. You always were a poor student, John Blackwood. That's why the Cherokee spirits chose you for this job in the first place. My blood went cold. John Blackwood? But he's the first foreman here. Mary nodded. 1,880 to 1,923. Worked these miners harder than any man should be worked. When the Cherokee spirits offered him a choice, death for his cruelty or eternal service, keeping the deeper evils contained, he chose service. Been down here ever since, convincing himself he's still in charge. The foreman, Blackwood, let out a roar that shook dust from the chamber ceiling. I am in charge. These are my workers, my mine. Your prison, Mary corrected, and you've been doing such a poor job of it, we've had to step in. She pulled something from her bundle, a mining helmet so old it looked like it was made of tarnished silver. The headlamp wasn't electric, but some kind of crystal that glowed with warm, clean light. This belonged to the first Cherokee man to work these mines. Before your people came and started digging where they shouldn't, he volunteered to go underground when the deep things started stirring, to keep them from rising up and poisoning the world above. She handed me the helmet. It was warm to the touch and lighter than it should have been. The real guardians were Cherokee, she continued. Volunteers who chose to go into the deep places and hold the barriers. But when the mining started, when hundreds of men began dying in cave-ins and explosions, their spirits got mixed up with the guardian spirits. The barriers weakened. Things that should stay deep began rising toward the surface. I looked around the chamber at all the dead miners. So they're not really trapped here? They're guardians, Mary nodded, doing the job they never wanted but accepted anyway, keeping the deep things down where they belong. Your father knew. When the mine collapsed in 1952, it wasn't an accident. Something was trying to break through from below. He stayed behind to help hold it back. My father stepped forward, and for the first time since I'd found him, he looked truly alive. The boy doesn't understand, Mary. Never told him about the family business. Thought maybe he could have a normal life. No normal lives for the Thornfield men, Mary said sadly. Your family's been mining guardians for 4 generations. Your great-grandfather saw what they were really digging toward and tried to warn the mining company. They fired him. Your grandfather tried to organize the miners to stop digging the deepest shafts. They blacklisted him. Your father. She looked at him with genuine respect. Your father made the ultimate sacrifice. Blackwood was getting agitated, his massive form pacing back and forth on the platform. Enough talk. The boy chooses now, or I take all of them. The boy chooses, Mary agreed, but he chooses with full knowledge. She nodded to one of her companions, who began unpacking what I'd thought was old mining equipment. It was mining equipment, but it had been modified. Pickaxes, with symbols carved into the handles. Lanterns that glowed with the same warm light as the helmet. Ropes that looked like they were woven from something stronger than hemp. These are the real tools, Mary explained. Made for the real work. Not mining coal, mining truth. Going into the deepest places and making sure the barriers hold. Your father's been using makeshift equipment for 20 years. Time to give him proper gear. I looked at the helmet in my hands. It felt right somehow, like it had been made for me. What happens if I put this on? You become what your family was always meant to be, Mary said. A guardian, a watcher, someone who goes into the deep places so others don't have to. The pay's terrible, the hours are worse, and you probably won't live to see retirement. But the work matters. And the students? Go free. Memory intact, so they can warn others if they're smart enough to listen. And if they're not, Mary shrugged. Well, natural selection's got to count for something. I looked at my father, still standing there in his rotted mining clothes. What do you want me to do, Daddy? His answer surprised me. I want you to choose for yourself, son. Same choice I had. Same choice every Thornfield man has had for 100 years. You can put on that helmet and join the family business, or you can walk away and let someone else handle the deep things. Won't think less of you either way. Blackwood laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Walk away? Boy puts on that helmet, he's mine forever, same as all the rest. Cherokee magic can't change the rules of the mountain. Cherokee magic made the rules of the mountain, Mary said quietly. And Cherokee magic can change them. She began to sing, the same chant I'd heard earlier. The other Cherokee men joined in, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to come from the stone itself. The chamber began to glow with warm light, and for the first time since I'd entered the mine, the air felt clean. The dead miners began to change. Their rotted clothes became clean work gear. Their skeletal faces filled out with muscle and flesh. Their dead eyes sparked with life and intelligence. They weren't prisoners anymore. They were volunteers. My father looked like himself again, the strong, weathered man who'd taught me to fish and hunt and respect the mountains. When he spoke, his voice was warm and alive. The Cherokee are right, son. This isn't slavery. It's service. Someone's got to keep the deep things down where they belong. Question is, are you man enough for the job? I put on the helmet. The moment the Cherokee helmet settled on my head, everything changed. I could see the mountain's true shape. Not just rock and coal, but layers of reality stacked like geological strata. The upper levels where normal people lived and worked. The middle levels where the dead miners kept their watch. And far below, the deep places where things older than humanity stirred in their sleep. The students stood in front of me, blinking like they'd just woken from a long dream. Sarah looked around the chamber with clear, intelligent eyes. Ranger Thornfield, How did we? Where are we? Mine shaft #7, I told her. You've been missing for 2 days. Are you hurt? They checked themselves over, confused but unharmed. Jenny found a notebook in her pack and flipped through it with growing alarm. I don't remember writing any of this. Listen. Day 6 underground. The foreman says we're behind quota. Must work harder to honor the mountain's gift. Day 6? We've only been here since yesterday afternoon. Time moves differently down here, I explained. You need to leave. Now. And when you write your geology report, you mention that these mines are structurally unsound and should be avoided. Understand? Tom nodded eagerly. Yes. Sir, we'll make sure nobody else comes down here. As they gathered their gear, I looked around the chamber. The dead miners had returned to their work, but it was different now. They moved with purpose instead of compulsion. They were choosing to be here, protecting the world above from things it couldn't handle. My father approached, carrying one of the modified pickaxes Mary had brought. Ready to learn the family trade, son? What exactly do we do down here? He pointed toward the deepest tunnel, where shadows moved in ways that hurt to watch. We keep them sleeping. Every few weeks, something stirs down there. Something that remembers when the world was different, when things like us were food instead of masters. We go down and remind them that their time is over. Mary Stonecrow finished her chanting and began packing her bundle. The barriers are strong again, should hold for another generation, maybe 2, but someone needs to watch. Someone needs to maintain them. How many of us are there? I asked. Guardians? Maybe a dozen active sites in Appalachia. Coal mines mostly, but some timber operations. A few mountain resorts built on the wrong land. Cherokee Nation keeps track, makes sure there's always someone watching. She handed me a leather pouch filled with what looked like carved stones. Emergency beacons. If something gets past you, if the barriers fail, you break one of these. Help will come. What kind of help? Mary smiled that not quite nice smile again. The kind that makes the evening news. Forest fires that burn in perfect circles, landslides that bury whole communities. Government testing areas that nobody's allowed near for 50 years. We do what we have to do to keep the deep things contained. I looked at the pouch, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like coal dust. And if I want out? If I change my mind? Train a replacement, my father said simply. Someone you trust to do the job right. Thornfield men have been holding this post for 4 generations, but it doesn't have to stay in the family forever. The students had reached the chamber entrance. I could see daylight beyond, looking impossibly bright after the eternal twilight of the deep mine. They turned back once, waving their thanks, then disappeared into the tunnel that would take them back to the surface. Blackwood still stood on his platform, but he looked smaller now. More human. The Cherokee ritual had broken whatever hold the deep things had on him, and he was remembering who he'd been before a century of darkness had twisted him. I'm sorry, he said, his voice no longer the grinding sound of moving stone. I forgot what I was supposed to be doing down here. Started thinking I was in charge, instead of just keeping watch. It happens, Mary said gently. The deep places whisper to you, try to convince you that you're the master instead of the guardian. That's why we need multiple watchers, people who can remind each other of the truth. She shouldered her pack and headed for the tunnel entrance. I'll check back in 6 months. If you need anything before then, use the emergency beacons. And Samuel? Yes, ma'am? Your grandfather would be proud. Your father already is. After she left, the chamber fell quiet, except for the steady rhythm of picks on stone. I walked over to where my father was working, a section of the coal face, examining the rock for signs of weakness or change. What am I looking for? I asked. Cracks that weren't there yesterday. Heat where there should be cold. Sounds that don't belong. The deep things are always testing the barriers, looking for weak spots. We patch them up, reinforce them, keep them strong. He showed me how to read the stone, how to tell the difference between natural settling and supernatural pressure, how to use the modified tools to strengthen the Cherokee barriers without disturbing the delicate balance that kept everything in its proper place. It's not glamorous work, he admitted. No medals, no recognition. Most folks up top will never know we exist. But every family that goes to sleep safe, every child that grows up without nightmares, about things crawling up from the deep places, that's our reward. I hefted my pickaxe, feeling its weight and balance. It was good work gear, made to last, made for the long haul. How often do things try to break through? Often enough. Last serious attempt was 15 years ago. Something big, something old. Took 3 guardians working together to put it back to sleep. We lost one man that day, good fellow named Peterson from the Kentucky coal mines. His son took over the watch. I thought about that. Generations of families, all doing the same dangerous, thankless work, all keeping the barriers strong so the rest of the world could live in ignorant safety. "I'm ready," I said. My father grinned, the first real smile I'd seen from him since I was 12 years old. "Then let's get to work, son. The mountain's not going to guard itself." We worked together in comfortable silence, father and son, guardians of the deep places. Above us, 3 college students drove back to their university with a story about structural instability and unsafe mining conditions. They would file their report and move on with their lives, never knowing how close they'd come to waking something that had been sleeping since before their ancestors first crossed the ocean. In his office, 17 miles away, Deputy Morrison would file a report about 3 missing students found safe and sound by Ranger Sam Thornfield. The mine would be marked as too dangerous for public access, and the Forest Service would post additional warning signs. Life would go on. But deep underground, in chambers carved from living rock, the real work continued. The work of keeping the barriers strong, the work of maintaining the balance, the work of making sure some sleepers never wake up. And in a leather pouch on my belt, 5 emergency beacons waited for the day when the barriers might fail and the Cherokee Nation would have to take more permanent action. Because there were some things too dangerous for even the guardians to handle alone. But that was a problem for another day. Today, I had coal to mine and barriers to maintain. Today, I had my father back and honest work to do. Today, the deep things stayed sleeping, and the world above remained safe. That was enough. My name is Catherine Shadow Dancer, but everyone just calls me Kate. I've been a ranger on Roan Mountain for 18 years now, and in all that time, I've never seen anything like what happened last June. People always ask about my last name. Half Cherokee, half Scottish. My great-aunt used to say, we were born to dance between 2 worlds. She told me stories about sky spirits and mountain dancers when I was little, but I never believed any of that. I became a ranger because I loved the science of weather, the way storms built and broke across these peaks. I had a degree in meteorology before I ever put on a uniform. Roan Mountain sits right on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee, 6,285 feet of exposed rock and rhododendron gardens. In June, when the flowers bloom, it's like standing in a pink and white cloud. But the mountain's famous for something else too, the weird lights people see up there, aurora-like displays that shouldn't exist this far south. Locals call it the mountain aurora, but I always figured it was just unusual electrical activity. My weather station sits near the summit, monitoring conditions that can change from clear to deadly in minutes. The altitude makes everything tricky. Temperature swings, pressure drops, electromagnetic weirdness that messes with radio signals. After 18 years, I thought I understood this mountain's moods. I was wrong. It started on June 15, 1976. I remember because it was the day my fancy new atmospheric monitoring equipment arrived from the National Weather Service. State-of-the-art stuff that could measure electromagnetic fields, track pressure changes, even analyze the spectrum of light phenomena. I was excited to finally get some real data on those strange lights. The morning was perfect, clear skies, light breeze, temperature in the 70s. I spent the day setting up the new instruments, calibrating sensors, running test readings. Everything worked perfectly. The electromagnetic readings were normal, pressure was stable, no sign of the weirdness that usually plagued the mountain. That should have been my first warning. Around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed the silence. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. The rhododendrons stood perfectly still, like they were holding their breath. I'd never heard the mountain so quiet. I checked my instruments. Still normal. But the hair on my arms was standing up, and I could taste metal in the air. That sharp, electric flavor that comes before lightning. I scanned the sky, not a cloud anywhere. Then I saw the first light. It started as a shimmer about 100 yards away, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but the air was cool, and the shimmer was moving against the breeze. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the spot. For just a second, I thought I saw something, a figure made of light dancing between the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. My new electromagnetic sensor started beeping. The readings were climbing, slowly at first, then faster. The numbers didn't make sense. According to the machine, I was standing in the middle of an electrical storm, but the sky was clear blue. I radioed down to headquarters. "Base, this is Kate. I'm getting some unusual readings up here. Electromagnetic activity without weather cause." Static answered me, then a voice, but not from headquarters. It spoke in Cherokee. I couldn't understand the words, but I knew the language from childhood visits with my great-aunt. The voice was singing something, a song that made my skin crawl and my heart race at the same time. "Base, do you copy? I'm getting interference on this channel." More static. Then English. "The sky spirits are waking up, Kate. You should come down now." I knew that voice. It was my great-aunt Mary, but she'd been dead for 3 years. I shut off the radio with shaking hands. Equipment malfunction. Had to be. Old frequencies bleeding through, some kind of atmospheric reflection. I'd heard of it happening during unusual electromagnetic events. The light shimmer appeared again, closer this time. In the fading afternoon sun, it looked almost solid, tall, graceful, moving with purpose through the rhododendrons. Following a path that led directly to my weather station, I packed up my equipment and hiked down the mountain faster than I ever had before. But even as I reached my truck, I could see lights beginning to dance on the summit behind me. Beautiful, impossible lights that painted the evening sky in colors that had no name. That night, I sat in my cabin and told myself it was just equipment problems and atmospheric tricks. Mountain weather could be weird. Everyone knew that. But I kept thinking about my great-aunt's stories, about sky spirits who danced on the mountain peaks, protecting sacred places from those who didn't understand. About the old Cherokee name for Roan Mountain, place where sky spirits dance. Just stories, I told myself. Just stories. The next morning, 3 planes reported navigation equipment failures near Roan Mountain. Commercial flights had to be redirected around a 20-mile radius because their instruments went haywire when they got close. The FAA called me directly. "Ranger Shadow Dancer? This is Tom Mitchell, Air Traffic Control. We need you to check for any electrical issues on your mountain. Our pilots are reporting some kind of electromagnetic field that's interfering with their systems." I drove back up to the weather station with a knot in my stomach. In daylight, everything looked normal. The rhododendrons swayed in a gentle breeze, birds sang in the trees, and my instruments read normal atmospheric conditions. But there were footprints around my equipment, barefoot prints in the soft earth, but not human. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. They circled my weather station 3 times, then led off into the forest toward the old Cherokee ceremonial grounds that were supposed to be legend. I followed the tracks. The trail wound through thick rhododendron bushes and up rocky slopes I'd never explored in 18 years of working this mountain. The prints were always just ahead, clear in patches of mud or soft earth, disappearing on stone outcrops, only to reappear on the other side. After an hour of climbing, I found the clearing. It was perfectly round, maybe 50 feet across, filled with standing stones arranged in complex patterns. Some were natural rock formations, but others had clearly been placed by human hands or something with human intelligence. Cherokee symbols were carved into many of the stones, worn smooth by centuries of weather but still visible. In the center stood a single massive boulder, flat on top like an altar. And on that altar sat my electromagnetic sensor, the one I was sure I'd packed up the night before. The device was running, its screen showing readings that made no sense. Electromagnetic activity off the charts, temperature fluctuations of 40 degrees, atmospheric pressure that suggested I was standing at 15,000 feet instead of 6,000. But the air felt normal. Cool mountain breeze, comfortable pressure, steady temperature. I approached the altar carefully. The ground around it was marked with more of those strange footprints, dozens of them, as if a whole group had danced around the stone in some kind of ceremony. As I reached for my equipment, the prints began to fill with light. Not reflection, actual light. glowing up from inside each track like they were windows into some bright world below. The glow was soft at first, barely visible in the afternoon sun, but it got stronger, and the lights began to pulse in rhythm like a heartbeat. I grabbed my sensor and ran. Behind me, I heard singing. The same Cherokee song from my radio, but now it came from a dozen voices, maybe more. Male and female, young and old, harmonizing in a way that made the mountain itself seem to hum. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. When I looked back, lights were dancing all across the upper slopes of Roan Mountain. Not just shimmers this time, but clear, defined figures moving between the trees with grace and purpose. That evening, I called Cherokee Elder Thomas Skywalker. He lived down in the valley and served as unofficial keeper of the old stories. "Thomas, it's Kate Shadow Dancer. I need to ask you about something." "I've been expecting your call," he said quietly. "The spirits told me you found the dancing ground." My blood went cold. "What dancing ground?" "The place where the sky spirits gather when the mountain is threatened. Your great-aunt Mary used to talk to them, you know, before the government weather stations scared them away." "Thomas, I need to know what's really going on up there." There was a long pause. "The sky spirits are the guardians of sacred places, Kate. They protect the mountain from those who would harm it or use it without permission. They've been sleeping for many years, but something has awakened them." "What kind of something?" "Well, Punov. Someone who belongs to both worlds. Someone with the old blood and the new knowledge. Someone who can bridge the gap between the spirits and the modern world." I felt sick. "You think it's me?" "I think," Thomas said gently, "that your great-aunt left you more than just stories." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw dancing lights and heard Cherokee songs on the wind. Around midnight, I gave up and went outside to look at the mountain. The entire summit was glowing. Not with fire or electric lights, but with a soft, pulsing radiance that seemed to breathe with life. And in that glow, I could see them clearly for the first time. Figures of light moving across the peak in elaborate dances. Tall and graceful, they spun and leaped and gestured to the sky as if conducting the very stars. There had to be dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all moving in perfect harmony, and one of them was looking directly at me. Even from miles away, I could feel its attention like a physical touch. It raised one glowing arm and beckoned, then pointed to my truck. The message was clear. "Come back to the mountain. Come back alone." I returned to Roan Mountain the next morning with a backpack full of supplies and a head full of doubts. The rational part of my mind kept insisting this was all some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon, maybe combined with stress and too much time alone on the mountain. The Cherokee part of my mind, the part that sounded like my great-aunt Mary, knew better. The weather station was gone. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone. The concrete pad where it had stood for 8 years was clean and smooth, like it had never been there at all. But my new monitoring equipment sat neatly arranged in the exact center of the pad, working perfectly and showing impossible readings. According to the sensors, the electromagnetic field strength was enough to power a small city. The temperature was fluctuating between 32 and 98 degrees every few seconds, and the atmospheric pressure readings suggested I was somehow standing simultaneously at sea level and 20,000 feet. But I felt fine. Normal temperature, normal air pressure, normal everything. I was studying the readings when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around expecting to see another hiker, maybe a tourist who'd gotten lost on the trails. Instead, I saw myself. She looked exactly like me. Same height, same dark hair, same ranger uniform, but her eyes were filled with light, and she moved with the same flowing grace I'd seen in the dancing figures. "Hello, Kate," she said in my voice. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my hand reaching for the radio that wasn't there. "Who are you?" "I'm what you could become," she said. "What your great-aunt wanted you to become. A bridge between the worlds. This isn't real. You're not real." She smiled, and her skin began to glow with soft, warm light. "Reality is more flexible on sacred ground. Your people knew this once. They danced with us, learned from us, helped us protect the places that matter. My people? Cherokee and Scottish both. The mountain folk always knew about the thin places where spirits could cross over. Roan Mountain is one of the thinnest places of all. The other me began to fade, becoming translucent. But there's something you need to see first. Something that will help you understand why we need you." She gestured toward the trail, leading deeper into the mountain. "The research team arrived this morning. They're setting up equipment in the heart of the sacred ground. If they succeed, they'll drive us away forever." "What research team?" But she was already gone, leaving only the faint scent of rhododendrons and ozone. I followed the trail she'd indicated, hiking deeper into parts of the mountain I'd never explored. The path was old, centuries old, maybe worn smooth by countless feet over generations, Cherokee feet, based on the symbols carved into trees along the way. After 2 hours of steady climbing, I heard voices and the hum of electrical equipment. The research team had set up a full science camp in another circular clearing, this one even larger than the first. Expensive-looking instruments covered every inch of available space: computers, sensors, satellite dishes, generators humming loudly enough to drown out the natural sounds of the forest. 3 people in white lab coats moved between the machines, taking readings and making notes. They hadn't noticed me yet, so I crept closer to listen. "Electromagnetic readings are off the charts," a young woman was saying. "Whatever's causing this phenomenon, it's centered right here. Could be some kind of natural electromagnetic resonance," said an older man. "Mineral deposits, underground water, maybe volcanic activity." The third person, a middle-aged woman with gray hair, shook her head. "The patterns are too regular, too complex. This looks almost intentional." "You're suggesting intelligence?" The older man laughed. "What? Little green men? I'm suggesting we don't understand what we're looking at yet." I was about to step into the clearing and introduce myself when the equipment started going crazy. Alarms blared, screens flickered, and several monitors showed readings that made no sense. Negative temperatures, impossible electromagnetic spikes, gravitational anomalies. Then the lights appeared. They rose from the ground like glowing mist, swirling around the clearing in patterns too beautiful and complex to be natural. The research team stopped working and stared, their scientific instruments forgotten. "Are you getting this?" the young woman whispered. But their cameras showed only empty air. Their sensors registered nothing unusual. According to their equipment, the clearing was completely normal. The lights began to take shape, human-like figures made of soft radiance, spinning and dancing around the frightened scientists. The figures didn't seem threatening, just curious, like they were studying these strange visitors to their home. Then one of the researchers made a mistake. The older man grabbed a device that looked like a cross between a vacuum cleaner and a radio antenna. "Electromagnetic capture array," he announced. "If these are some kind of plasma formation, we should be able to contain them for study." He flipped a switch, and the machine roared to life with a sound like a tornado made of electricity. The dancing lights recoiled as if they'd been burned. Their soft glow turned harsh and angry, and the temperature in the clearing dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The scientist tried to aim his machine at the nearest light figure. The being looked directly at him and screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of wind through broken trees, of ice cracking on deep water, of loneliness that had lasted 1,000 years. The sound went through me like a knife, and I fell to my knees with my hands over my ears. When I looked up, the research camp was in chaos. Equipment sparked and smoked, computers showed error messages in languages that didn't exist, and the 3 scientists were running for the tree line as fast as they could move. But the electromagnetic capture device was still running, still pulling at the light beings like a magnet pulls iron filings. And they were getting weaker. I could see them fighting the machine's pull, their forms growing dim and ragged as it drained their energy. They were trying to flee, but the device was too strong. Without thinking, I ran into the clearing and kicked the machine as hard as I could. It toppled over with a crash of sparks and broken glass, and the terrible pulling sensation stopped. The light figures surrounded me immediately. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt welcomed. They touched my face and hands with fingers of warm radiance, and I heard voices speaking in Cherokee, words I somehow understood even though I'd never learned the language. "Thank you, Bridgewalker. We remember your blood. Your great aunt dances with us in the spirit world. Will you help us protect the sacred places?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, but I don't know how." The largest of the light beings stepped forward, tall and graceful, with features that seemed familiar. When it spoke, The voice was warm and sad and infinitely patient. First, you must choose. Scientist or spirit keeper, bridge between worlds or guardian of one. You cannot be both without understanding both. I don't understand. You will, it said gently. But first, you must see what we see, feel what we feel, dance as we dance. The being reached out and touched my forehead with fingers of pure light. The world exploded into color and sensation beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The moment the spirit touched me, I was flying. Not falling or floating, flying with purpose and joy across landscapes of light that existed in the same space as our physical world, but somehow deeper, more real. I could see both versions at once, the ordinary mountain with its trees and rocks, and the spirit realm of dancing energy and living light that occupied the same territory. This is how we see your world, the spirit said, its voice now coming from inside my own thoughts. Life layered upon life, energy flowing through everything, connections that bind all things together. Below us, I could see the streams of light that connected every living thing on the mountain, glowing threads that pulsed with shared vitality. The rhododendrons were part of a vast network, their roots and branches creating pathways for spiritual energy. The birds carried messages between different parts of the mountain ecosystem. Even the rocks hummed with slow, ancient songs. And the sacred places blazed like stars. We are the guardians, the spirit continued. Not rulers, not owners, guardians. We help maintain the balance, keep the energy flowing, protect the connections that keep this place alive. But why did the research equipment hurt you? The spirit's sadness washed over me like cold wind. It tried to capture us, trap us, turn us into data for study, but we are not things to be captured. We are relationships, connections, songs that exist between spaces. To trap us is to kill us. We soared higher, and I could see the entire Appalachian mountain range spread out below us, a vast network of sacred sites connected by rivers of light. Some sites blazed with spiritual energy, others had gone dark. And in those dark places, I could see the wounds, clear-cut forests where the light threads had been severed, strip mines that tore holes in the energy network, development projects that blocked the flow of spiritual connections. Each wound weakened the entire system. We have been losing the battle for generations, the spirit said. Fewer and fewer humans remember how to see us, speak with us, work with us. The old agreements are forgotten. What agreements? Your great-aunt knew. The Cherokee people made promises to help us protect the sacred places in exchange for our protection of their people. We taught them weather calling, healing, safe passage through dangerous territory. They taught us about human needs and helped us understand how to share the land. We descended back toward Roan Mountain, and I could see the research camp clearly now. From the spirit realm, the electromagnetic capture device looked like a weapon designed specifically to harm beings of light and energy. The scientists weren't evil, just ignorant. But their ignorance was deadly. That's why you need me, I realized. Someone who understands both worlds. Yes. But first, you must choose which world you truly belong to. The flying sensation stopped, and I found myself standing in the sacred circle again. But now I could see it clearly from both perspectives. The physical stone circle and the blazing mandala of spiritual energy it focused and contained. The light beings surrounded me, dozens of them, all waiting for my answer. Among them, I recognized a familiar face. Great Aunt Mary? She smiled, her form composed of warm golden light. Hello, little weather reader. I told you the spirits would call you someday. I don't understand what they want from me. They want what I wanted, for you to remember who you are. Not just a scientist studying weather, but a keeper of sacred relationships. A bridge between the world of measurements and the world of meaning. The lead spirit stepped forward again. The choice is simple but permanent. Remain in the world of machines and measurements, and we will retreat deeper into the spirit realm until we fade away completely. Or step fully into your role as bridge keeper and help us protect what remains of the sacred network. What would I have to give up? Nothing that truly matters. Your knowledge, your skills, your love of this mountain, all of that becomes stronger when connected to spiritual understanding. But you would have to give up the illusion that the physical world is all that exists. I looked at my great-aunt. Is this why you tried to teach me the old stories? I tried to prepare you, she said, Your Scottish ancestors knew about the thin places between worlds, too. Both sides of your family carried the knowledge, but it was almost lost. The research team's electromagnetic device started humming again. Through the trees, I could see emergency lights flashing. They were calling for backup, bringing in more equipment, more weapons disguised as scientific instruments. Choose now, the lead spirit said urgently. If they succeed in capturing even one of us, they'll bring others. Military researchers, government scientists, corporations that want to exploit spiritual energy for profit. This mountain will become a laboratory, and we will become test subjects. I thought about 18 years of weather monitoring, of trying to understand the mountain through instruments and measurements. I'd learned a lot, but I'd never really known the mountain until this moment. What do I have to do? Dance with us, the spirit said simply. Let the spiritual energy flow through you the way it flows through the trees and stones. Become part of the network instead of just studying it. My great-aunt held out her glowing hand. It doesn't hurt, little one. It's like coming home to a place you never knew you'd been missing. I reached out and took her hand. Light poured into me, not harsh or burning, but warm and welcoming, like sunlight on a perfect spring morning. I could feel my consciousness expanding, connecting to every living thing on the mountain. The rhododendrons whispered their secrets to me, the stones shared their ancient memories, and the sky spirits taught me the songs that called storms and cleared skies. But I was still me, still Kate, still a ranger, still someone who loved weather and science and the practical work of protecting this place. Now, the lead spirit said, help us send a message to the researchers. Show them that some things cannot be captured or controlled. Together, all of us, dozens of spirit beings, and one newly awakened bridgekeeper, began to dance. The dance was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Not movement of bodies, but movement of energy, creating patterns in the air that called wind and lightning, and the deep power that sleeps in the mountain's heart. Thunder rolled across clear skies. The aurora lights that should only appear near the poles began painting the southern sky in impossible colors, and every piece of electronic equipment within 20 miles stopped working all at once. In the research camp below, alarms fell silent, computers went dark, and the electromagnetic capture device died with a final, defeated whine. The message was clear: this mountain is protected. Some things are not meant to be captured. The dance continued until dawn, and when the sun rose, everything had changed. The research team left that same morning, their equipment mysteriously broken beyond repair. Their official report blamed unprecedented electromagnetic anomalies for the equipment failures and recommended that Roan Mountain be classified as unsuitable for atmospheric research. But I stayed. The Weather Service tried to reassign me, worried that the electromagnetic issues might be dangerous for a permanent station. I convinced them to let me continue monitoring the area using traditional methods: barometers, thermometers, visual observation, and Cherokee weather reading techniques that turned out to be far more accurate than any electronic system. The mountain's weather became perfectly predictable once I learned to ask the spirits what they were planning. Thomas Skywalker helped me understand my new abilities. The Cherokee Tribal Council officially recognized me as a weather keeper, responsible for maintaining the spiritual relationships that kept the mountain in balance. I learned the old songs for calling rain during droughts, the dances that calmed dangerous storms, and the ceremonies that honored the spirits who made weather possible. My ranger duties didn't change much. I still hiked the trails, maintained the facilities, and helped lost tourists. But now I could sense weather changes days in advance, guide people away from dangerous areas before storms hit, and find missing hikers by asking the mountain spirits where they'd gone. The aurora lights still dance on Roan Mountain, especially during the spring rhododendron season. Tourists come from hundreds of miles away to see them, never knowing they're watching Cherokee sky spirits celebrate another year of successful protection of their sacred territory. Scientists occasionally try to study the atmospheric anomalies, but their equipment always malfunctions in ways that suggest natural electromagnetic interference. The spirits have learned to hide themselves from electronic sensors while revealing their beauty to anyone with eyes to see and respect to offer. I keep weather records the old way now. Handwritten observations, traditional Cherokee seasonal markers, and reports that blend meteorological data with spiritual insight. The National Weather Service files them under local observer reports and treats them as useful but unscientific folk knowledge. They don't realize that my weather predictions are more accurate than their computer models. Every full moon, I climb to the sacred circle and dance with the spirits. My great-aunt Mary is always there, along with dozens of other Cherokee ancestors and the sky spirits who have guarded this mountain for centuries. They teach me new songs, share stories from other sacred sites, and help me understand my role in the vast network of spiritual guardians that protects the remaining wild places. The work isn't always easy. Developers sometimes try to build roads through sacred groves. Mining companies apply for permits to explore the mountain's mineral resources. Government agencies propose new weather monitoring stations with equipment that would disrupt the spiritual energy flows. But the spirits have their ways of protecting what matters. Construction equipment breaks down mysteriously. Survey teams get lost even with GPS systems. Environmental impact studies reveal unexpected populations of endangered species that require habitat protection. And sometimes, when the threat is serious enough, the aurora lights dance in broad daylight, and the mountain itself speaks in languages older than science. Last month, a new research team arrived with equipment even more sophisticated than the first group. They'd heard about the unique electromagnetic properties and wanted to establish a permanent monitoring station. I met them at the trailhead wearing my ranger uniform and my Cherokee Weatherkeeper medallion. "Gentlemen," I said politely, "I need to inform you that this mountain is protected by federal wilderness laws, tribal treaty rights, and spiritual agreements that are still in effect. Your research permits don't include permission to disturb sacred sites or interfere with traditional Cherokee religious practices." "We're not planning to disturb anything," their leader said. "We just want to study the unusual atmospheric phenomena." I smiled and pointed to the sky, where the first hints of aurora light were beginning to shimmer despite the bright afternoon sun. "The phenomena you want to study are the visible manifestations of spiritual guardians who have protected this mountain for over 1,000 years. They don't like being treated as research subjects." The lights grew brighter, and a warm wind began to blow from all directions at once. The scientists' electromagnetic sensors started beeping frantically. "However," I continued, "they're quite happy to share their knowledge with respectful visitors who understand the difference between studying something and trying to capture it." I spent the next 3 days teaching the research team basic Cherokee protocols for approaching sacred sites. We made traditional offerings, learned the songs that ask permission to enter spiritual territory, and practiced the kind of respectful observation that gathers knowledge without trying to possess or control what's being studied. By the end of their week on the mountain, the team had collected more useful data about atmospheric anomalies than any previous expedition. But more importantly, they'd learned to see the lights as guardians rather than phenomena, protectors of a sacred place rather than subjects for scientific exploitation. Their report recommended that Roan Mountain be designated as a site of both ecological and cultural significance, protected by a partnership between the National Park Service and Cherokee tribal authorities. The protection laws passed last year. Now I work officially as both a federal ranger and a Cherokee weatherkeeper, monitoring the mountain with instruments that blend traditional knowledge and modern science. Weather stations throughout the region consult my forecasts, which combine satellite data with spiritual insight and turn out to be remarkably accurate. Tourists still come to see the lights, and I give them the same advice Thomas Skywalker gave me: approach with respect, watch with wonder, and remember that some things are too sacred to be captured or explained. The spirits dance every clear night now, celebrating their successful defense of the sacred places and the return of humans who know how to be partners instead of conquerors. And sometimes, when the moon is dark and the aurora lights are particularly bright, I see other mountains in the distance beginning to glow with their own spiritual guardians, awakening after decades or centuries of sleep. The network is rebuilding itself, one sacred site at a time. My great-aunt was right. I was born to dance between worlds. But it took the sky spirits of Roan Mountain to teach me the steps. My name is Martha Windcutter, but everyone calls me Marty. I've been a park ranger for 15 years, and I've never lost anyone on my watch. Not once. That's something I'm proud of, especially working the winter rescue beat in the Chattahoochee National Forest. When the snow starts falling and the temperatures drop below freezing, I'm the one they call. Blood Mountain is the highest peak in Georgia, and it's my territory. The Cherokee used to call it Udweyusty, where they had the fight. My grandmother told me that story when I was little. She was Cherokee, full blood, and she knew things about these mountains that you won't find in any ranger manual. She always warned me about the hunger spirits that came with the worst winter storms. I used to think those were just old stories meant to keep kids from wandering off in bad weather. I should have listened to her more carefully. February 1983 brought the worst blizzard Georgia had seen in 50 years. The snow started falling on a Tuesday morning and didn't stop for 3 days. By Thursday, we had 8 feet of snow on the ground and winds hitting 60 miles per hour. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero, cold enough to kill you in minutes if you weren't prepared. That's when the call came in. 6 winter hikers were 3 days overdue. They'd been planning a week-long trek through the Blood Mountain wilderness, experienced folks with good gear. The kind of people who usually know better than to get caught in weather like this. I suited up in my winter rescue gear, the heavy-duty stuff that keeps you alive in conditions that would freeze most people solid. I've survived worse than this. Hell, I survived a plane crash in the Canadian wilderness when I was in the military. Spent 2 weeks living off bark and snow until a Cree hunting party found me. That's where I learned real winter survival, not from books, but from people who'd been doing it for generations. The missing group had filed a proper itinerary. 6 people, 2 couples in their 30s, and an older pair celebrating their retirement. They'd planned to set up base camp near Byron Reese Trail and do day hikes from there. Good plan, smart route. These weren't stupid city folks playing mountain man. So why hadn't they come back? I loaded my snowmobile with emergency supplies and headed up the mountain. The wind was howling so loud I had to use hand signals to talk to my radio dispatcher. Normal winter storm stuff, nothing I hadn't handled before. But there was something different about this cold. It seemed to bite deeper than it should, like it was reaching right through my gear to grab my bones. The first sign of trouble was their base camp. I found it after 2 hours of fighting through snowdrifts taller than my head. Their tents were still standing, guy lines tight, everything properly secured. But they were empty. Not just empty, abandoned. Like the people inside had just vanished into thin air. I checked the camp carefully. All their food was still there, untouched. Sleeping bags were laid out like they'd been planning to come back. But their winter gear was gone. Coats, boots, snow pants. That made sense if they'd gone hiking. What didn't make sense was the condition of the camp. No note. No sign of struggle. And strangest of all, no snow inside the tents, even though the wind was strong enough to blow snow through any gap. It was like the storm had been carefully avoiding their campsite. I radioed in my findings and started following what tracks I could find. The snow was coming down so hard that most sign was getting covered within minutes, but I managed to pick up a trail heading south toward the cliff face. 6 sets of boots, moving in single file. Normal hiking formation, but the tracks were wrong somehow. They started out normal, size 10 and 11 boots, different tread patterns, the kind of random variation you'd expect from a group of hikers. But as I followed them up the mountain, they began to change. The spacing got longer, like the people making them were taking bigger steps. And they were deeper, like the hikers were getting heavier. By the time I'd followed them a quarter mile, the tracks looked like they'd been made by someone running uphill. In snow 3 feet deep, in the middle of a blizzard. That's when I started to worry. I followed those impossible tracks for another hour before I found the first real sign that something was seriously wrong. There was blood in the snow. Not a lot, just spots and drops, like someone had a nosebleed or cut their hand. But it was bright red, fresh, and it wasn't getting covered by the falling snow like everything else. The blood trail led to a rocky outcrop about 50 yards off the main trail. Hidden behind the rocks was a natural wind shelter, the kind of place smart hikers would stop to rest and warm up. But what I found there made my stomach turn. Someone had been digging in the frozen ground with their bare hands. The earth was torn up in long gouges, fingernails and bits of skin frozen to the rocks. Next to the dig site was a pile of gear. Expensive winter coats, insulated boots, thermal underwear. Good stuff, the kind that keeps you alive in weather like this. But it had been shredded to pieces, torn apart like someone had attacked it with claws. And there was more blood, a lot more, I called it in immediately. This wasn't a case of lost hikers anymore. This was a potential crime scene, maybe worse. Dispatch told me the state police couldn't get through the storm, and helicopter rescue was impossible with the wind conditions. I was on my own until the weather broke. That should have been my cue to set up shelter and wait for backup. Standard procedure when you find evidence of violence is to secure the scene and call for help. But those people were still out there somewhere, possibly injured, definitely in danger. Every minute I waited increased the chance that hypothermia would kill anyone who was still alive. So I kept following the trail. The tracks led deeper into the wilderness, toward areas where no sane person would go in good weather, let alone during a blizzard. The Blood Mountain Wilderness has some of the most dangerous terrain in Georgia. Cliff faces, hidden ravines, cave systems that go down hundreds of feet. In winter, those places become death traps. But the tracks kept going. I was starting to notice other things too, things that made my 15 years of ranger experience feel worthless. The wind wasn't random anymore. It seemed to be pushing me in specific directions, hurting me along certain paths, while blocking others with wall-like gusts. The snow was falling in patterns that didn't match the storm structure I'd observed earlier. And the temperature was dropping faster than it should, even accounting for altitude and wind chill. Most disturbing of all, I was hearing voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Mountain winds can sound like almost anything, crying, laughing, screaming. I'd heard it all before. But these voices were different. They were calling my name. Marty, clear as day, coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. Marty, help us. I followed the voice deeper into the woods, my radio crackling with static that almost sounded like whispered words. The tracks were getting stranger. What had started as 6 sets of normal boot prints were now only 4 sets, but they were bigger, much bigger, size 14, maybe 15, with a stride length that suggested someone over 7 feet tall. But the really disturbing part was what I found scattered along the trail. Pieces of the missing hiker's gear, but not damaged by weather or animals. These items looked like they'd been carefully arranged, placed in specific spots like trail markers, a compass pointing the wrong direction, a water bottle filled with something dark that wasn't water, a GPS unit that showed coordinates for a location that didn't exist. Someone, or something, was leaving me a message. The trail led to a cave entrance I'd never seen before, even though I'd hiked this area hundreds of times. It was hidden behind a curtain of icicles, perfectly natural looking, but positioned in a way that would be invisible unless you were standing in exactly the right spot. The tracks led straight inside, but there were no tracks coming back out. I should have waited for backup. I should have marked the location and returned with a full search team. But I could hear voices echoing from inside the cave. Weak, frightened calls for help. If there were injured hikers in there, every minute counted. I checked my gear, turned on my high-powered flashlight, and entered the cave. The temperature inside was even colder than outside, cold enough that my breath created instant ice crystals in the beam of my flashlight. The cave went back much further than I'd expected, opening into a natural chamber about 30 feet wide. And there, huddled against the far wall, I found them. 4 of the 6 missing hikers. But something was terribly wrong. They were alive, conscious, and apparently uninjured. But they'd been in sub-zero temperatures for 3 days without adequate shelter, and they showed no signs of hypothermia. Their skin wasn't blue or frostbitten. They weren't shivering. They were just sitting there in light clothing, looking at me with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. "Thank God you found us," said the woman who'd been listed as the group leader. Her voice was normal, relieved, exactly what I'd expect from someone who'd been rescued. But she was wearing a thin cotton shirt and jeans. No coat, no gloves, no winter gear at all. In 20 below weather. And she wasn't cold. "Where are the other 2?" I asked, playing my light around the cave. "Your group was listed as 6 people. The 4 of them looked at each other, and something passed between them that I didn't like. A shared understanding, like they were deciding what story to tell me. We lost them on the first day," said one of the men. "They went ahead to scout the trail and never came back. But his tracks were among the ones I'd followed to this cave." I was sure of it. "We need to get you out of here," I said. "The weather's too dangerous to." That's when I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand up straight. It was coming from deeper in the cave, from passages that my flashlight couldn't reach. a low, rumbling growl that sounded like it was coming from something much larger than any animal that should exist in these mountains. Something that was getting closer. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, training my flashlight toward the back of the cave. The 4 rescued hikers looked at me with expressions of perfect innocence. "Hear what?" asked the woman. The growling came again, louder this time, echoing through passages that seemed to go much deeper into the mountain than any cave system I knew about. But the hikers didn't react at all. They sat there like they couldn't hear a sound that was making my eardrums vibrate. That's when I noticed the smell. Sweet and cloying, like meat that had been left out too long. It was coming from deeper in the cave, but it was also coming from the people I was supposed to rescue. "We need to leave. Now," I said, backing toward the cave entrance. "Oh, but you just got here," said the man who'd supposedly lost his companions. When he smiled, I caught a glimpse of teeth that were too sharp, too white. "We've been waiting for you, Marty." I hadn't told them my name. My hand went to my radio, but all I got was static, mixed with what sounded like voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Cherokee, maybe, but older than anything my grandmother had ever taught me. The growling was getting closer, and now I could hear footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps that suggested something large was moving through the dark passages behind the chamber. The hikers were still smiling at me, but their eyes reflected my flashlight with a greenish glow that wasn't quite human. I backed toward the cave entrance, keeping my light trained on the 4 people who were supposed to be victims. But they weren't moving like people anymore. They rose from their sitting positions in one fluid motion, like marionettes being pulled by strings, and when they turned to face me fully, I saw that their winter clothes weren't just torn, they were stained with something dark. "You can't leave yet," said the woman. "He wants to meet you." "He?" The temperature in the cave dropped another 10 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in great white clouds, but the 4 hikers weren't breathing at all. No visible breath, no rise and fall of their chests. They were standing there in the killing cold like it was a warm spring day. That's when I saw the tracks. Real tracks, this time. Something had been moving through this cave recently. Something with claws instead of feet. Something that left gouges in the stone floor. The tracks were fresh, and they led from the deeper passages to where the hikers had been sitting. And then back again. "The others are still here," I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "The 2 missing hikers, they're still in the cave." "Oh yes," said one of the men. His voice had changed, become deeper, with an odd echoing quality like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "They're here. They're with him now. Learning." The footsteps from the back passages were getting louder. Whatever was making them was big, bigger than any bear, bigger than any animal that should exist. But mixed in with the heavy steps, I could hear something else. Human voices, speaking in unison, chanting words in that ancient language. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard laughter. Not human laughter, something cold and hungry and patient. The kind of sound a predator makes when it knows its prey can't escape. I made it to the cave entrance before I realized my mistake. The curtain of icicles that had hidden the cave was gone. In its place was solid rock, like the opening had never existed at all. I was trapped inside with whatever those things used to be, and whatever was coming from the deep passages. My flashlight beam swept frantically across the cave walls, looking for another way out. That's when I found the drawings. They covered every surface of the cave. Ancient petroglyphs that looked Cherokee but older, more primitive. The drawings showed stick figures being hunted by something tall and thin with too many joints. They showed people changing, transforming, becoming something else. And they showed winter. Always winter, with storms and cold and darkness. At the center of the largest drawing was a figure that made my blood freeze. It was roughly human-shaped but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, with arms that reached to the ground and a head that seemed too small for its body. Its mouth was open in what might have been a scream or a roar, and around it were smaller figures, people who looked like they were bowing down or feeding it. The Cherokee called it the winter hunger, my grandmother had said. The spirit that comes when people forget how to respect the cold. The footsteps stopped. The cave went completely silent except for the sound of my own harsh breathing. Even the 4 transformed hikers had gone quiet, standing motionless like they were waiting for something. Then I heard my grandmother's voice, clear as day, speaking Cherokee words I hadn't heard since childhood. "When the hunger comes, you must remember who you are." But it wasn't coming from my memory. It was coming from behind me. I turned around, and there she was. My grandmother, looking exactly like she had when I was 10 years old. She was wearing traditional Cherokee winter clothes, buckskin and fur, decorated with beads and feathers. But she was also translucent, like moonlight through fog. "Grandmother," I whispered, "the winter hunger is here, granddaughter. It has been waiting for you. I don't understand. Your blood calls to it, Cherokee blood, the blood of the winter keepers. It has been feeding on the others, growing strong, but it needs one of us to open the way." From the deep passages came a new sound, breathing, slow, deep breaths that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the air. Whatever was back there was big enough that each breath sounded like wind rushing through a canyon. The way to what? To the warm lands below. It is trapped here in the high cold places, but with the right sacrifice, it can descend to where the people live in comfort and safety. The 4 transformed hikers began moving toward me, their movements jerky and unnatural. Behind them, something pale and impossibly tall began emerging from the darkness of the deep cave. "How do I stop it?" "Remember the winter teachings," my grandmother's spirit said as it began to fade. "Remember what the cold really is." And then she was gone, leaving me alone with things that used to be people and something that had never been human at all. The thing that emerged from the deep cave was everything the petroglyphs had shown, and worse. It stood nearly 12 feet tall but was thin as a skeleton, all joints and angles that bent in directions that hurt to look at. Its skin was pale as fresh snow but seemed to move on its own, shifting and rippling like it was too big for the bones underneath. But the worst part was its face, or what should have been its face. It had human features, but they were all wrong. The mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that looked like icicles. The eyes were too far apart and glowed with a cold blue light. And when it spoke, its voice was the sound of winter wind through bare trees. "Cherokee blood," it said, the words echoing from multiple mouths at once. "The blood of the winter keepers. I have waited so long." The 4 transformed hikers moved to flank me, cutting off any escape route I might find. But they weren't the only ones. From the shadows at the edge of my flashlight beam, I could see others. The 2 missing hikers, but changed like the rest. And behind them, more figures. People who had been missing from these mountains for years, all transformed into servants of the winter hunger. "Your grandmother tried to keep me bound," the creature continued. "Her ceremonies, her protections, her teachings about respecting the cold. But she is gone, and the old ways are forgotten. The people have grown soft and careless in their warm houses." I thought about my grandmother's final words. Remember the winter teachings. Remember what the cold really is. She had taught me more than just survival techniques during those long winter nights when I was a child. She had taught me about balance, the Cherokee understanding that winter wasn't just an enemy to be fought, but a force that demanded respect. The cold could kill you, but it could also teach you. It could take away everything unnecessary and show you what you really were underneath. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "This isn't your territory." The creature's laugh was like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "Territory? I go where the hunger calls me. And there is so much hunger in the warm places below, so much want, so much greed, so much emptiness that calls to be filled. The Cherokee kept you in the high places for a reason. They're also Stadagem. The Cherokee are gone, removed, scattered. Their protections are broken." But that wasn't entirely true. I was here. And my grandmother had made sure I learned the old ways alongside the new ones. Not just survival techniques, but the deeper understanding. The knowledge of how to live with winter instead of just fighting it. The creature began moving toward me, its movements fluid despite its impossible angles. The transformed hikers closed in from the sides. I was trapped in a circle of things that had once been human, with something that had never been human at all. That's when I remembered the sacred bundle in my emergency pack. My grandmother had given it to me when I graduated from ranger school. I'd carried it for 15 years without really understanding why. Just tobacco, cedar, and some dried plants she'd gathered from specific spots on Blood Mountain. She'd made me promise to keep it with me during winter rescues, and I'd always thought it was just her way of keeping Cherokee tradition alive. Now I understood it was Cherokee winter protection. I pulled out the bundle with hands that were somehow steady, despite the terror coursing through me. The moment the sacred materials touched the air, the creature stopped moving, its glowing eyes fixed on my hands with something that might have been fear. "You know what this is?" I said. "Old magic, weak magic, the winter keepers are gone." "No," I said, finally understanding what my grandmother had been trying to teach me all those years. "The winter keepers are still here, we just forgot how to listen." I opened the bundle and began speaking the Cherokee winter protection words my grandmother had made me memorize. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But gradually, the temperature in the cave began to change. Not warmer, colder, but a different kind of cold. Clean cold. Natural cold. The kind of cold that preserved instead of corrupted. The creature screamed, a sound like a blizzard howling through mountain peaks. The transformed hikers staggered backward, clutching their heads as if in pain. And slowly, very slowly, they began to change back. The winter hunger wasn't just a predator. It was a corruption of natural winter, a perversion of the cold that was meant to teach and cleanse. By using the traditional protections, by remembering the proper relationship between humans and winter, I was restoring the balance. "You cannot banish me," the creature snarled. "I am hunger itself. I am the need that gnaws at every human heart." "You're not hunger," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You're greed. You're the hunger that never stops, never learns, never respects limits. And that's not natural." I continued the ceremony, scattering the sacred tobacco and cedar while speaking the words my grandmother had taught me. The cave began filling with a different kind of presence, not the oppressive weight of the winter hunger, but something older and stronger. The spirits of the Cherokee winter keepers, called back by the proper ceremonies. The creature began to shrink, its impossible height collapsing down to something more human-sized. The cold blue glow in its eyes flickered and dimmed. Around us, the transformed hikers completed their change back to normal humanity, collapsing to the cave floor, but breathing, alive, human again. "This is not ended," the thing that had been the winter hunger whispered as it continued to diminish. "There are other mountains, other hungry places. And there are other winter keepers," I said. "Cherokee, who remember the old ways. You might have fooled people who forgot how to respect the cold, but you can't corrupt the winter itself." The creature gave one final scream and collapsed into itself, becoming nothing more than shadow and mist that dissipated in the sacred smoke of the ceremony. The cave entrance reappeared, and cold mountain air began flowing into the chamber, normal winter cold, harsh but clean. I helped the restored hikers to their feet. They were confused and hypothermic, but alive and human. As we made our way out of the cave, I could feel my grandmother's presence one last time, approving and proud. The real winter was still out there, dangerous and demanding of respect. But it was natural winter now, winter that taught lessons instead of consuming souls. The official report listed it as a successful winter rescue operation. 6 hikers recovered alive after being trapped by severe weather conditions. The hikers themselves remembered very little, just getting caught in the storm and taking shelter in a cave until rescue arrived. "Hypothermia-induced memory loss," the doctors said. "Happens all the time in extreme cold." I didn't correct them. The Cherokee Tribal Council was more interested in my report. I met with Elder Joseph Snowfeather 3 days after the rescue, and he listened to the whole story without interrupting once. When I finished, he nodded like he'd been expecting something like this. "Your grandmother did her job well," he said, "but the protections need to be renewed regularly. The old ways don't maintain themselves." "I don't know enough," I admitted. "She taught me some of the ceremonies, but not all of them. Then, you'll learn the rest." The mountains need winter keepers who understand both the traditional ways and the modern world. Rangers who can recognize when something is natural winter and when something is corrupted winter. Over the next few months, I spent my off-duty time learning Cherokee winter ceremonies and protections. Not as a cultural curiosity, but as practical knowledge for my job. The Forest Service was surprisingly open to incorporating traditional methods into rescue operations, especially after I demonstrated their effectiveness during several difficult winter rescues. I also started noticing things I'd missed before, signs of spiritual activity in the mountains, places where the natural balance was strong or weak. Other rangers began reporting unusual winter incidents, and I found myself consulting on cases throughout the southeast mountain region. The winter hunger wasn't entirely gone. Something that ancient and hungry doesn't just disappear completely. But it was contained again, held in the high cold places where it belonged, kept in check by proper ceremonies and traditional respect for winter's power. I carry my grandmother's sacred bundle on every winter rescue now, along with my modern equipment. And I teach other rangers about the importance of understanding local folklore and traditional ecological knowledge. Not because I believe every old story, but because some of those stories contain information that can save lives. 3 years later, I'm still a ranger on Blood Mountain. I still haven't lost anyone on my watch. But now I understand that losing someone can mean more than just failure to prevent death from exposure. It can mean losing them to something that feeds on human weakness and disrespect for natural forces. The hikers I rescued that day all returned to their normal lives, but they changed their winter hiking habits. They take more precautions now, show more respect for severe weather. None of them remember exactly why, but something deep inside them learned to fear the kind of hunger that pretends to be natural cold. Sometimes, on the worst winter nights, when the temperature drops below zero and the wind howls through the peaks, I can feel the winter hunger testing the boundaries of its prison. Looking for cracks in the protection ceremonies, searching for people who have forgotten how to respect winter properly. But I'm watching. And I'm not the only one anymore. The Cherokee Winter Keeper traditions are being taught to a new generation of rangers and rescue personnel. The old knowledge is being preserved alongside modern techniques. My grandmother was right. Winter teaches you who you really are underneath all the unnecessary things. And what I learned is that I'm a bridge between two kinds of knowledge, traditional and modern, both necessary for keeping people safe in dangerous places. The mountains are still dangerous. Winter is still deadly if you don't respect it properly. But now I know the difference between natural winter that tests and teaches, and corrupted winter that only consumes. And I know how to make sure the winter hunger stays where it belongs, in the high cold places, far from the people it would devour. Some nights, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear my grandmother's voice carried on the mountain air, speaking the old protections that keep the balance between human need and natural power. The winter keepers are still here, we're still watching, and we're still learning. My name is Jacob Ravencrest, but everyone calls me Jake. I've been a park ranger at Monongahela National Forest for 13 years now, and I've seen things in these mountains that would make most people pack up and never come back. But I keep coming back, because someone has to watch over these caves. The Seneca Rocks Formation is something special. 900 feet of white quartzite stone rising straight up from the forest floor like God's own skyscraper. From the ground, it looks solid as a wall. But I know better. Inside those rocks is a maze of caves and tunnels that goes deeper than anyone's ever mapped. My specialty is cave rescue. When people get lost or hurt underground, I'm the one they call. It was March of 1977, and the spring rains had been coming down hard for a week. That's always dangerous time in the caves. Water levels rise fast underground, and passages that were safe one day can turn into death traps the next. I was checking my equipment in the ranger station when the call came in. "Jake, we got a problem," said my supervisor, Tom Bradley, through the radio static. "Professional mapping team went into the cave system 3 days ago. Should have been out yesterday morning." I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. 3 days was too long, way too long. "Which team?" I asked, already pulling on my gear. Dr. Sarah Chen's group from the university. 4 people total. They were supposed to map the Eastern Passage system. I knew that area well. It wasn't the deepest part of the cave system, but it had its tricks. Tight squeezes, false passages, and water that could rise without warning. Still, Dr. Chen was no amateur. She'd been mapping caves for 15 years. Any radio contact at all? Nothing since day 2. Last message said they found some interesting formations and were going to explore a side passage. That didn't sound right. Professional cavers don't just wander off their planned route, especially not Dr. Chen. She followed safety protocols like they were gospel. I loaded my truck with rope, lights, emergency medical supplies, and enough food and water for a long haul. The drive to the cave entrance took 20 minutes on muddy forest roads. When I got there, I found their vehicles still parked at the trailhead, 2 trucks covered in rain and bird droppings. The main cave entrance was just like I remembered it, a black hole in the white rock face, about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Water was trickling out of it from the recent rains. I shined my flashlight inside and called out, "Dr. Chen, Sarah, can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed back from the darkness, but there was no answer. I checked my watch. 3:30 in the afternoon. I had maybe 4 hours of daylight left, but that didn't matter much underground. In the caves, it was always night. Before I went in, I did what my great-uncle Charlie had taught me years ago. Uncle Charlie was half Seneca Indian, and he used to tell me stories about these rocks when I was a kid. Stories about spirits that lived inside the stone, watching over anyone who entered their home. I never believed those stories, but I always followed his advice. Respect the rocks, move slow, listen to everything. I stood at the cave entrance and spoke to the darkness. "I'm coming in to find my friends. I mean no harm to your home." It sounds crazy now, but Uncle Charlie swore it kept you safe underground. And in 13 years of cave rescue, I'd never lost anyone. The entrance passage sloped down at a gentle angle for about 50 feet, then opened into what we called the welcome room, a chamber big enough to hold a school bus. Dr. Chen's team would have stopped here first to organize their gear and check their equipment. I found their first campsite right where I expected it. Sleeping bags laid out neat and tidy, cooking gear stacked against one wall, equipment organized in professional piles, but something felt wrong about the scene. It was too perfect, like a museum display. Real campsites have a lived-in feel, boots scattered around, maybe a jacket thrown on a rock. This looked like someone had arranged everything very carefully. I searched the chamber with my light and found the path they'd taken deeper into the cave system. Fresh boot prints in the mud, heading toward the eastern passages. But there were other marks in the mud too, marks that didn't look like boots at all. They looked like handprints, but wrong somehow. Too long, with fingers that seemed to stretch further than human fingers should. And they were pressed deep into the mud, like whatever made them was much heavier than a person. I shook my head and kept moving. Caves play tricks on your eyes. Shadows and strange lighting can make normal marks look like anything. I'd been underground long enough to know better than to jump to conclusions. But as I followed the boot prints deeper into the cave system, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness ahead. The eastern passage started wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, but it narrowed as it went deeper into the mountain. I followed Dr. Chen's team's route by their boot prints and the occasional piece of survey tape tied to rock formations. Professional cave mappers leave a clear trail, it's basic safety. But after about 200 yards, something changed. The boot prints were still there, but they started to wander. Instead of following the main passage, they veered off toward what looked like a dead-end chamber. That wasn't like Dr. Chen at all. She was methodical, careful. She wouldn't waste time exploring random side passages when she had a specific mapping mission. I followed the prints into the side chamber and found something that made my blood run cold. The chamber was maybe 30 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into black shadows above my flashlight beam. But the floor was covered with equipment, survey tools, rope, helmets, backpacks, all arranged in a perfect circle around the center of the room. Not dropped or scattered like you'd expect if people had been in a hurry or in trouble. Arranged. Each piece of equipment was placed exactly the same distance from the center, like markers on a clock face. In the center of the circle was a pile of rocks. Not natural cave rocks, these were smooth river stones, stacked in a perfect pyramid about 3 feet high. The kind of stones that take thousands of years of water, flow to shape, and definitely don't belong in a dry cave chamber. I called out again, "Sarah, Dr. Chen, where are you?" This time, I heard something back. Not a human voice, but something else. A sound like wind blowing through the rocks, but there was no wind in the cave. And underneath that sound, something that almost sounded like whispering. I stood very still and listened. The whispering got louder, but I couldn't make out any words. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. Then, my flashlight started to flicker. I smacked it against my palm, but the flickering got worse. The beam started to dim, even though I'd put fresh batteries in before entering the cave. In the failing light, the shadows around me seemed to move and shift. That's when I saw the second set of prints leading out of the chamber. They were human boot prints, but they were different from the ones I'd been following. Deeper, like the people who made them were carrying heavy loads. And they led toward a passage I'd never seen before. I'd been in this cave system dozens of times over the years. I knew every chamber, every passage, every tight squeeze. But this passage was new, a tunnel about 5 feet high, heading deeper into the mountain. I should have gone back for backup, should have called for more rangers, more equipment, maybe contacted the state police. But I could hear Uncle Charlie's voice in my head. When people are lost underground, Jake, time is everything. Every hour you wait might be an hour too long. So I followed the new passage. The tunnel was smooth, like it had been worn by water over thousands of years. But the floor was dry, and there were no signs of the flooding that would have created such smooth walls. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was being carried much further than it should. After maybe 100 yards, the passage opened into another chamber. This one was bigger than the first, so big my flashlight couldn't reach the far walls. But I could see Dr. Chen's team. All 4 of them were sitting in the center of the chamber, arranged in a circle around another pile of stones. They were facing outward, like they were keeping watch. But they weren't moving. "Sarah," I shouted, running toward them. Dr. Chen turned her head as I approached. Her eyes were open, and she seemed to recognize me, but something was wrong with her expression. She looked calm, too calm, like someone in a deep trance. "Jake," she said in a voice that sounded far away. "You shouldn't have come here. What happened? Are you hurt? Where have you been for 3 days?" She tilted her head like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. 3 days?" she said. "We just got here an hour ago." The other team members turned to look at me. Dr. Martinez, Peterson, and young Amy Sullivan from the graduate program. They all had that same distant look in their eyes, like they were seeing something that wasn't quite there. "We have to go," I said. "There's flooding coming. The passage could fill with water." But Dr. Chen shook her head. "We can't leave yet. They're teaching us." "Teaching you what? Who's teaching you?" She pointed into the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. "The rock speakers. They've been here all along, waiting for people who could listen." I swept my flashlight across the chamber, but I didn't see anyone else. Just shadows and stone formations. "Sarah, you're not making sense. There's nobody here but us. You've been missing for 3 days, and people are worried." But even as I said it, I could hear the whispering again. Louder now, more distinct. And for just a moment, I could swear I heard actual words, not English, but something that sounded like the old Seneca language Uncle Charlie used to speak when he thought nobody was listening. That's when I realized Dr. Chen might not be wrong about being here for just an hour. Because when I checked my watch, it showed 3:45 p.m., only 15 minutes since I'd entered the cave. But I'd been walking for at least an hour. I stared at my watch, hoping the display was wrong. But the second hand was ticking normally, and the time couldn't be right. I'd walked more than a mile through cave passages, explored 2 chambers, found Dr. Chen's team. That should have taken at least 2 hours. "Your watch is broken," Dr. Chen said. But she wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at something over my shoulder. I spun around, raising my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but all I could see were the natural stone walls of the chamber. Limestone and quartzite, shaped by millions of years of slow water flow. But the whispering was getting stronger. And now I could hear something else underneath it, a sound like footsteps, but not quite right. Too slow, too heavy, like someone walking who wasn't used to having feet. "We need to leave right now," I said, grabbing Dr. Chen's arm. "All of us." She pulled away from me, but gently, like she was trying not to hurt my feelings. "Jake, you don't understand. This is the most important discovery in the history of cave exploration. They're showing us things, passages that don't appear on any geological survey, chambers that exist in dimensions we can't measure." "They? Who are they?" Before she could answer, Amy Sullivan stood up from her place in the circle. The graduate student had always been quiet and serious, but now she moved like she was sleepwalking. She walked past me toward the far wall of the chamber, and I followed her with my light. What I saw made me forget about time, about getting everyone out safely, about everything except trying to understand what I was looking at. The wall wasn't solid stone anymore. There was an opening, not a natural cave passage, but something that looked like it had been cut with tools. The edges were too smooth, too precise. And beyond the opening, my flashlight beam showed another passage. This one, going straight down. "That wasn't there when I came in," I said. Amy turned back to me with that same distant smile. It's always been there. You just weren't ready to see it before. She stepped through the opening and started walking down the descending passage. I lunged forward to grab her, but she was already too far ahead. My flashlight beam followed her down the slope until she disappeared around a bend. "Amy," I shouted. My voice echoed back up the passage, but there was no other answer. Dr. Chen stood up behind me. "She'll be fine. They're protecting her now." "Protecting her from what?" But before she could answer, I heard Amy scream. The sound came from somewhere far below us, echoing up through the new passage. Not a scream of fear, but something worse, a scream of understanding, like someone who had just learned something terrible about the world. I didn't think. I just ran into the passage after her. The slope was steep but not dangerous, worn smooth like the other passages I'd found. My boots had good grip on the stone. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Chen and the others following, but they were moving slowly, like they had all the time in the world. The passage curved back and forth as it descended, always heading deeper into the mountain. I called Amy's name, but got no answer except echoes that seemed to go on longer than they should. After what felt like 10 minutes of running downhill, the passage opened into a vast chamber. This one was different from the others, bigger, older, with formations that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen in 13 years of cave exploration. Columns of stone twisted up from the floor like frozen tornadoes. The walls were covered with patterns that looked almost like writing, but not in any alphabet I recognized. And the ceiling disappeared into darkness so complete that my flashlight beam just seemed to get swallowed up. Amy was standing in the center of the chamber, but she wasn't alone. There were figures around her, tall, thin shapes that seemed to be made of the same stone as the cave walls. They moved like people, but wrong, like they were remembering how to walk after being still for a very long time. Their faces were human-shaped, but carved from living rock. And they were talking to Amy in that whispering voice I'd been hearing. Only now I could understand some of the words. They were speaking Seneca, the same language Uncle Charlie had tried to teach me when I was young. Asterisk Guajillo. Asterisk, one of them said. Asterisk Skenin. Asterisk. Asterisk. Hello. Peace. Asterisk. Amy turned toward me as I entered the chamber. Her eyes were bright, excited, like a student who'd just solved a difficult problem. "Jake, they're incredible. They've been here since before the first humans came to these mountains. They're the guardians of the deep places, the keepers of the rock's memory." One of the stone figures moved closer to me. Up close, I could see that it wasn't carved stone at all. It was something that looked like a person, but was made of the same white quartzite as the Seneca rocks themselves. Its eyes were dark holes that seemed to go on forever. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through stone cracks. Asterisk. "You are the nephew of Ganchus, and me." Asterisk. It said in English that sounded like it came from 100 years ago. Asterisk. "He spoke of you. You carry his blood, but not his understanding." Asterisk. "Ganus of Ace." That was Uncle Charlie's Seneca name, the one his grandmother had given him, a name I'd never heard anyone else speak. "What do you want with these people?" I asked. Asterisk. "To teach." Asterisk, the figure said. Asterisk. "As we taught your uncle's uncle, and his uncle before him. The caves hold memories that go back to the beginning. Some humans can learn to read those memories. Others..." Asterisk. It gestured toward the entrance of the chamber, and I turned to see Dr. Chen and the rest of her team walking in. But something was wrong with the way they moved. They walked in perfect unison, like they were all following the same instructions. Asterisk. "Others become part of the memory." Asterisk. The figure finished. That's when I realized Dr. Chen's team hadn't been missing for 3 days. They'd been changed into something else, something that looked human but wasn't anymore. And now these rock creatures wanted to do the same thing to me. I backed toward the chamber wall, keeping my flashlight trained on the stone figures. There were more of them now, 8 or 9 moving out of the shadows, surrounding me and Amy. Dr. Chen's team stood perfectly still, watching with those distant eyes. "Amy, we have to get out of here," I said. But she shook her head. "You don't understand, Jake. They're not trying to hurt us. They're trying to save us." "Save us from what?" The largest of the stone figures stepped forward. It was taller than the others, maybe 7 feet, with carved features that looked almost like Uncle Charlie's face. When it spoke, I could hear my great-uncle's voice underneath the rocky whisper. Asterisk. "The surface world forgets. Asterisk, it said. Asterisk, people come to the deep places without respect, without understanding. They take from the caves and give nothing back. They measure and map and claim ownership of stones that were old when their grandfathers' grandfathers were not yet born. Asterisk. I thought about all the cave expeditions I'd guided over the years. Scientists, tourists, adventure seekers, people who saw the caves as puzzles to solve or thrills to experience, never thinking about what they might be disturbing. Asterisk. Your uncle understood. Asterisk. The figure continued. Asterisk. He came to us as a young man, seeking vision. We taught him the old ways, the proper relationship between surface dwellers and the deep guardians. He promised his family would continue that relationship. Asterisk. But I'm not Seneca, I said. I'm only 1/4 Indian, and I never learned the old ways. Asterisk. Blood is less important than understanding. Heart is less important than respect. Asterisk. The figure gestured, and the stone walls around us began to change. Patterns appeared in the rock, not carved, but growing, like the stone itself was alive. I could see images forming, hunters and gatherers approaching cave entrances with offerings. Ceremonies conducted in deep chambers, generations of people who treated the caves as sacred places rather than recreation areas. Asterisk. We offer you the same choice we offered your uncle. Asterisk, the figure said. Asterisk. Learn the old relationship. Become a bridge between the surface world and the deep places. Or, asterisk. It gestured toward Dr. Chen's team, still standing motionless with their empty eyes. Asterisk. Become part of our memory, where you will be safe but no longer yourself. Asterisk. Amy stepped closer to me. Jake, they're showing me things. The caves go everywhere under these mountains, all connected, all alive. And there are others like them, guardians in caves across the whole continent. They've been trying to protect the deep places for thousands of years, but people keep forgetting how to listen. I looked at Dr. Chen, trying to reach whatever was left of the scientist I'd known. Sarah, is this what you want? To give up everything you were? For a moment, her eyes seemed to focus. I remember. My daughter. I have a daughter in California. She's 7 years old. The stone figures shifted, and I heard something like sadness in their whispers. Asterisk. Those who join our memory keep their love. Asterisk, the tall figure said. Asterisk. But they can no longer act on it in the surface world. It is regrettable, but necessary. Asterisk. No, I said. There has to be another way. I remembered something Uncle Charlie had told me when I was young, right after I'd survived that cave-in when I was 23. He'd said I was saved for a reason, that the rocks themselves had protected me. At the time, I'd thought he meant I was just lucky. Uncle Charlie, I said to the tall figure. You knew him. He taught me to respect the caves, to ask permission before entering, to never take more than I gave back. Isn't that the old relationship you're talking about? Asterisk. You know the words, asterisk, it replied. Asterisk. But do you understand their meaning? Asterisk. I thought about 13 years of cave rescues, of people I'd pulled out of dangerous situations, of lives saved in the darkness underground. Maybe I'd been doing more than I realized. Maybe I'd been serving as a guardian all along, just in a different way. I understand, I said. You need someone who can work with both worlds, someone who knows caves and surface people, who can teach proper respect without scaring everyone away. Asterisk. And you would do this? Asterisk, the figure asked. Asterisk. You would serve as keeper of the old ways, teacher of the proper relationship? You would speak for the deep places when the surface world threatens them? Asterisk. I looked at Dr. Chen, at the fear still lurking behind her distant expression. I thought about her daughter in California, about all the other families who would lose people if this continued. Yes, I said, but only if you let them go. All of them. They didn't know they were violating anything. Let them return to their lives, and I'll make sure others learn the proper way. The stone figures whispered among themselves in rapid Seneca. Finally, the tall one nodded. Asterisk, it is agreed. But know this, you will be changed by this covenant. You will see the world differently, feel the deep places differently, and you will carry responsibility for maintaining the balance until you train another to take your place. Asterisk. I understand. The figure reached out and placed a hand made of living stone on my forehead. The touch was warm. Not cold like I'd expected, and I felt something flow between us. Knowledge, understanding, memories that went back thousands of years. I saw the caves as they really were. Not empty holes in the rock, but living spaces with their own awareness, connected to each other across vast underground networks. I felt the presence of other guardians, human and non-human, scattered across North America's deep places. And I understood my role in keeping the balance between two worlds that needed each other more than either realized. When the figure removed its hand, I knew I was different. The caves would never again be just geology and adventure to me. They were home to something ancient and patient and wise, something that deserved respect and protection. Dr. Chen blinked and looked around like she was waking from a deep sleep. "Jake, what? Where are we?" "We're going home," I said. The walk back to the surface took exactly 45 minutes. Following passages that I now understood had always been there, waiting for someone who knew how to see them. Dr. Chen's team moved like sleepwalkers at first, but they became more alert as we climbed toward daylight. When we emerged from the cave entrance, the sun was setting behind the mountains. According to my watch, we'd been underground for 3 hours, not the 3 days everyone thought Dr. Chen's team had been missing. "I don't understand, Doctor," Chen said as we reached their vehicles. "My equipment says we've been recording data for 72 hours, but I only remember going into the cave this afternoon." I helped her load their gear into the trucks. Sometimes caves play tricks with time. The important thing is everyone's safe. What I didn't tell her was that I could feel the presence of the stone guardians even here on the surface, watching from deep inside the mountain, waiting to see if I would keep my word. The official report was simple. Dr. Chen's team had gotten disoriented in the cave system during the flooding, and I'd found them sheltering in a deep chamber until the water levels dropped. Equipment malfunction explained the missing time records. Everyone accepted the explanation, glad to have a resolution that didn't require complicated investigations. But things changed after that. I started including traditional protocols in my cave rescue training, asking permission before entering, leaving appropriate offerings, teaching respect for the deep places. I told people these were Native American conservation practices, which was true enough. Most accepted it as cultural sensitivity training. Dr. Chen never returned to cave mapping. She said the experience had made her realize she wanted to spend more time with her daughter. But sometimes I caught her staring at stone formations with an expression I recognized the look of someone who remembered more than they were willing to admit. Amy Sullivan changed her graduate focus from geology to anthropology, specializing in Native American cave traditions. She never asked about what had happened in the deep chamber, but she always made a point to thank me for showing her a new way of seeing things. The biggest change was in the cave incidents themselves. Over the next 5 years, we had fewer cave emergencies, fewer people getting lost or injured underground. Word spread quietly among serious cavers that the Seneca Rock system required special respect, special preparation. People started coming to me for guidance before attempting difficult expeditions. I married a woman named Lisa who worked for the Seneca Nation Cultural Preservation Program. She never asked why I sometimes woke in the middle of the night, listening to whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. But she supported my work with traditional cave protocols and helped me learn more of the old language Uncle Charlie had tried to teach me. Our son was born 3 years later. We named him Charlie, and from the time he could walk, he showed the same intuitive understanding of stone and cave that his great-great-uncle had possessed. Sometimes I catch him talking to rocks in the backyard, having conversations that sound remarkably one-sided from my perspective. The stone guardians keep their distance now, but I know they're always watching. Every few months, I make the descent to the deep chambers, bringing offerings of tobacco and cornmeal, sharing news from the surface world. The relationship holds. But I'm getting older, and the time will come when I need to train someone else to take my place. The guardians are patient, but they won't wait forever. The balance between worlds requires active maintenance. Sometimes, when I'm leading a cave rescue operation or teaching respect protocols to a group of young cavers, I feel Uncle Charlie's presence. He's been gone for 8 years now, but his voice still echoes in the deep places. Asterisk. The rocks remember everything. Asterisk, he told me once. Asterisk. They remember the first people who came to these mountains, and they'll remember the last. Your job is to make sure there's always someone who knows how to listen. Asterisk. I'm listening, Uncle Charlie. And I'm teaching others to listen too. Because somewhere in the darkness beneath Seneca Rocks, ancient guardians are still keeping watch over the deep places, still waiting for the next generation to learn the old ways. And the stones are still speaking to those who know how to hear. My name is Victoria Nighthunter, but everyone calls me Vic. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Bears that get too friendly with campers, hikers who think they're tougher than a West Virginia winter, and enough broken bones from folks who don't respect the rocks up here. But I've never seen anything like what happened last November in Dolly Sods. Dolly Sods is different from other places. It sits up high on a plateau, over 4,000 feet above sea level, where the air gets thin and the weather changes fast. One minute you're walking through open meadows that look like something from Ireland. The next, you're fighting through thick spruce forest that blocks out the sun. It's beautiful in a wild, dangerous way. My grandmother used to tell stories about this place. She was Cherokee, and she'd talk about the night guardians that watched over these mountains. I never believed those old stories. I'm a wildlife biologist. I deal in facts, not fairy tales. When I see tracks, I know what animal made them. When I hear howling, I know it's wolves or coyotes or wild dogs. But grandmother always said Dolly Sods was special. She called it the place where spirits run. I figured she was just trying to scare me into being careful in the woods. I should have listened to her. The whole mess started on November 15th, when 3 hikers called in a report that didn't make sense. They said a pack of wolves had escorted them to safety during a sudden snowstorm. Not attacked them, escorted them, like the wolves knew they were lost, and helped them find the trail back to their car. These weren't normal wolves, the lead hiker, a guy named Tom Bradley, told me over the radio. They were huge, and they moved like they were thinking, planning something. When we tried to go the wrong way, they'd block our path. When we went the right way, they'd follow behind us. I'd been tracking the wolf population in Dolly Sods for years. There were maybe 8 to 10 wolves total in the whole area. They kept to themselves, avoided humans, and definitely didn't play rescue squad for lost hikers. But the tracks Tom's group showed me were real enough. Wolf prints, but bigger than any I'd seen before. And the pattern was strange, like the wolves had been walking in formation, keeping the humans in the middle of their group. Maybe they smelled food in your packs, I suggested. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. If wolves wanted food, they'd take it. They wouldn't spend 3 hours guiding tourists through a blizzard. 2 days later, I got another call. A local rancher named Pete Morrison reported that something had been in his pasture the night before. But instead of killing his sheep, whatever it was had apparently protected them from a bear. Found the bear tracks all around the fence. Pete told me when I drove out to his place. But there were other tracks too, wolf tracks, big ones. And it looked like the wolves chased the bear off before it could get to my animals. I walked the fence line with Pete, studying the tracks in the mud. He was right. There were bear tracks approaching the sheep pen, but they suddenly stopped and headed back toward the forest. The wolf tracks were everywhere, and they showed clear signs of aggressive behavior toward the bear, not the sheep. In 30 years of ranching, I've never seen anything like it, Pete said, shaking his head. Wolves protecting livestock? That's not natural. He was right. It wasn't natural. But the evidence was right there in front of us. That night, I decided to set up camp in Dolly Sods and see what I could observe. I brought my best tracking equipment, night vision gear, and radio equipment to stay in touch with headquarters. I found a good spot on a rocky outcrop where I could watch the meadows below. I set up just as the sun was going down, and that's when I heard it for the first time. Howling. Not just one wolf, but several. Maybe 5 or 6 voices joining together in a chorus that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But there was something wrong with the sound. Wolf howls are meant to communicate over long distances. They're sharp and clear, designed to carry through the forest. This howling was different, deeper, more complex. It rose and fell in patterns that almost sounded like language, and it seemed to be answering something. I grabbed my radio to call it in, but all I got was static, filled with the sound of more howling. It was like the wolves were somehow getting into the radio frequency. As the night went on, the howling continued. Sometimes it was close, sometimes far away. But always, it seemed to be watching me, waiting for something, Around midnight, I saw them. 5 wolves emerged from the tree line below my camp. Even through the night vision scope, I could see they were enormous, much larger than any wolf should be. They moved across the meadow in perfect formation, not hunting, just patrolling. The lead wolf stopped directly below my position and looked up at me. Even from 50 yards away, I could see its eyes reflect the moonlight. It stared at me for a long moment, then threw back its head and howled. The sound went right through me. It wasn't just a wolf call, it was a message. A warning, maybe, or an invitation. The pack disappeared back into the forest, but I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. And I was starting to understand that my grandmother's stories might not have been stories at all. The next morning, I found the first signs that something was seriously wrong. My equipment had been moved during the night, not damaged or stolen, just carefully rearranged. My tracking sensors, which I'd placed in a grid pattern around the meadow, had been repositioned into a perfect circle. The GPS units were stacked in a neat pile, all turned off. No animal does that. Animals might knock equipment over or chew on it, but they don't organize it into geometric patterns. I checked the memory cards in my trail cameras, expecting to see footage of the wolves I'd observed. Instead, I found something that made my hands shake. The cameras had captured the wolves moving through the area, but the timestamps were all wrong. According to the cameras, the pack had been in 5 different locations at exactly the same time. That was impossible, unless there were more wolves than I'd thought, or the cameras were malfunctioning. But the images themselves were crystal clear. The wolves were massive, easily twice the size of normal wolves, and they moved with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. In one shot, a wolf was looking directly into the camera, its head tilted like it was curious about the technology. In another image, 2 wolves appeared to be examining one of my GPS units, sniffing at it like they were trying to understand what it was for. I called my supervisor, Frank Martinez, to report what I'd found. "Vic, you're telling me a wolf pack is playing with your equipment?" Frank's voice crackled through the radio. "I'm telling you, these aren't normal wolves, Frank. The behavior patterns don't match anything in our databases. And the size, you need to see these photos. Could they be wolf-dog hybrids? Sometimes domestic dogs breed with wild wolves, and you get larger animals." I looked at the photos again. The proportions were wrong for hybrids. These looked like pure wolves, just impossibly large. Maybe. But that doesn't explain the intelligence level I'm seeing here. All right, I'm sending Jim Patterson up to help you. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Jim arrived that afternoon, bringing additional tracking equipment and a skeptical attitude. "Frank says you think we've got super wolves up here," he said as we hiked to my observation point. "I think we've got wolves that are behaving in ways that don't match their species profile," I corrected. Jim was a good ranger, but he was strictly by the book. He believed in scientific explanations for everything, and he wasn't buying my story about intelligent wolf behavior until he saw them himself. We were setting up our equipment just before sunset when the howling started again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. "Jesus," Jim whispered, grabbing his binoculars. "How many of them are there?" The sound seemed to come from every direction at once. But when we scanned the forest with our night vision equipment, we couldn't see anything. "They're moving," I said, staying just inside the tree line. Then Jim grabbed my arm. "Vic, look." He pointed to the meadow below us. The wolves were emerging from the forest in single file, like soldiers on parade. I counted them as they appeared. 6, 7, 8 wolves, all of them massive. But it was their formation that made my blood run cold. They weren't moving randomly. They were arranging themselves in a circle around something in the center of the meadow. "What are they doing?" Jim asked. Through my scope, I could see what was in the center of their circle. It was my backpack, the one I'd left at my camp the previous night. Somehow, they'd taken it from my secured campsite and brought it to the middle of the meadow. The largest wolf, clearly the alpha, approached my pack. It sniffed at it, then sat back on its haunches and looked directly up at our observation point. "It knows we're here," Jim said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. The alpha wolf tilted its head back and howled. But this wasn't like any wolf call I'd ever heard. It was long and complex, with variations in tone that almost sounded like human speech. The other wolves joined in, creating a harmony that sent chills down my spine. And somehow, I understood what they were trying to tell us. Asterisk, come down, we want to talk. Asterisk, that's impossible, Jim said, but he'd heard it too. The pack held their formation for another few minutes, then melted back into the forest as quietly as they'd appeared. My backpack remained in the center of the meadow. "We need to call for backup," Jim said. I tried the radio, but again, all I got was static mixed with howling. It was like the wolves were jamming our communications. "Jim," I said, "I don't think these are normal wolves." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you think they are?" I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the night guardians who watched over sacred places, about spirits that took the form of wolves to protect the Cherokee hunting grounds. "I think," I said slowly, "that we're dealing with something my grandmother would have understood better than we do." That night, we took shifts watching the meadow. During my watch, around 2 a.m., I saw something that changed everything. A hiker emerged from the forest, clearly lost and panicking. He was stumbling around in the dark, obviously hypothermic and disoriented. In November in Dolly Sods, that was a death sentence. Then the wolves appeared. They surrounded the hiker, but not in an aggressive way. They formed a protective circle around him, like they'd done with my backpack. The alpha wolf approached the man slowly, calmly, and actually rubbed against his leg like a friendly dog. The hiker stopped panicking. I watched through my scope as the man seemed to calm down, like the wolf's presence was reassuring him. Then the pack began to move, guiding the hiker toward the main trail. They walked with him for over an hour, keeping him warm with their body heat, until he reached safety. "Jim," I whispered, "are you getting this?" "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'm getting it, but I don't believe it." The wolves had just saved a man's life. Not by accident, not by instinct, but through deliberate, intelligent action. Whatever these creatures were, they weren't just protecting territory. They were protecting people. But from what? The answer came 3 days later, when the killing started. Not the wolves doing the killing, something else. I was checking my equipment near the bog area when I found the first body. It was a young black bear, maybe 3 years old. But it hadn't died from natural causes or wolf attacks. Something had torn it apart. The claw marks were wrong for a bear fight. Too big, too deep. And the pattern of injuries suggested the bear had been trying to run away from something much larger and stronger than itself. I'd seen bear attack victims before, both animal and human. This was different. This was violent in a way that spoke of rage, not hunger. I called Jim over to examine the scene. His face went pale when he saw the carcass. "What could do this to a bear?" he asked. Before I could answer, we heard the howling again. But this time, it sounded different. Urgent. Warning us about something. "They're trying to tell us something," I said. Jim looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Vic, they're wolves. They don't tell us anything." But I was starting to understand that these weren't ordinary wolves. My grandmother's stories were making more and more sense. We found 2 more dead animals that day, a deer and a wild boar. Both killed in the same violent manner. Both found in areas where the wolf pack had been active. It was like something was hunting in the wolves' territory, and the wolves were trying to protect the local wildlife from it. That evening, we got a radio call that changed everything. A family of 4 hikers had gone missing in the northern section of Dolly Sods. They'd been due back at their car 6 hours ago. "We need to organize a search party," I told Jim. But as we were preparing to leave, the wolves appeared again. This time, they came right to our camp. The alpha wolf approached me slowly, stopping about 10 feet away. It looked directly into my eyes, and I swear I could see intelligence there. Ancient intelligence. Then it turned and started walking toward the forest. After a few steps, it stopped and looked back at us. "It wants us to follow," I said. "Vic, that's crazy. We can't follow a wolf pack into the forest at night." But something in my grandmother's voice was speaking to me. The stories she'd told about wolves that guided Cherokee hunters through dangerous territory. About spirit guardians who protected the innocent. "Jim, what if they know where the missing family is?" The alpha wolf whined softly, almost like it was pleading with us. Against Jim's protests, I decided to follow them. The pack led us through parts of Dolly Sods I'd never seen before. Dense forest that seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways. The wolves moved confidently through the darkness, occasionally stopping to make sure we were still behind them. After an hour of hiking, we heard screaming. Humans screaming, coming from somewhere ahead of us. The wolves immediately began moving faster, and we struggled to keep up. The screaming continued, a man's voice, terrified and desperate. We emerged into a small clearing where the missing family had set up camp. The father was standing over his wife and 2 children, holding a tree branch like a weapon. He was facing something at the edge of the clearing. I turned my flashlight toward what he was looking at and nearly dropped it. It was massive. 8 feet tall at least, covered in dark fur, with claws like kitchen knives. It looked like a bear, but wrong. Too tall, too aggressive, too intelligent. A mutant bear. Maybe something that had been affected by the old military contamination in the area. The creature was stalking toward the family, ignoring the father's shouts and threats. That's when the wolves attacked. The pack emerged from the forest like shadows, surrounding the creature. The alpha wolf leaped directly at the thing's throat while the others went for its legs and flanks. The battle was brief but vicious. The creature fought back, landing blows that sent wolves flying, but there were too many of them. They worked together with military precision, wearing the beast down until it finally collapsed. When it was over, the alpha wolf approached the terrified family. The father raised his branch, ready to defend his children from this new threat. But the wolf simply sat down and tilted its head, like it was asking if everyone was okay. The family stared in amazement as the pack checked the perimeter of their camp, making sure no other threats were nearby. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the wolves melted back into the forest. "Did that really just happen?" the father asked. Jim and I helped the family pack up their camp and guided them back to safety. They were shaken but unhurt, thanks to the wolves' intervention. As we walked, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd witnessed. The wolves hadn't just randomly encountered the family in trouble. They'd led us directly to them, like they'd known the family was in danger. How was that possible? "Vic," Jim said quietly as we reached the parking area, "those weren't normal wolves." No, I agreed, they weren't. But if they weren't normal wolves, what were they? The answer came from an unexpected source. The next day, an elderly Cherokee woman named Margaret Wolfspirit showed up at the ranger station. She said she'd driven 3 hours from the reservation after hearing about the unusual wolf activity in Dolly Sods. "Your grandmother was Rachel Nighthunter," she said to me without introduction. "Yes, ma'am." "How did you?" "She was my cousin, and she told me that someday her granddaughter would need to know the truth about the spirit wolves." Margaret sat down in my office and looked at me with eyes that seemed to see everything. "The place you call Dolly Sods is sacred Cherokee hunting ground," she said. "We call it where spirits run. It's protected by the ghost pack, spirit wolves that guard the boundary between our world and the spirit world." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You're talking about the wolves I've been tracking? The pack that saved your life when you were 7 years old? During the camping trip when regular wolves attacked your family?" I stared at her. I'd never told anyone about that incident, except my grandmother. How could she know? "The spirit wolves drove off the regular wolves and protected you," Margaret continued. "Your grandmother knew then that you were marked, chosen. The spirits were saving you for something important. Mrs. Wolfspirit, with respect, I'm a scientist. I don't believe in what? In what you've seen with your own eyes these past few weeks." She was right. Everything I'd witnessed contradicted my scientific training, but the evidence was undeniable. "The contamination from the old military site," Margaret said, "it didn't create mutant animals. It weakened the barrier between worlds. Things from the dark side started coming through. The spirit wolves appeared to keep the balance, to protect this sacred place. The creature that attacked the family, one of many. There are worse things trying to cross over. The spirit wolves are the only thing standing between our world and theirs." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a leather pouch filled with herbs and small bones. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you when you were ready to understand. It's a spirit wolf communication bundle. It will let you talk to the pack leader directly." I took the pouch, feeling the weight of generations of Cherokee wisdom in my hands. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "The same thing your grandmother would have done," Margaret said. "Help the spirit wolves protect this sacred place. They've been waiting for you to accept your role." That night, I took the pouch and hiked back into Dolly Sods. I found the meadow where I'd first seen the pack and sat down in the center, holding the spirit bundle. I didn't have to wait long. The alpha wolf emerged from the tree line alone. It approached me slowly, cautiously, until it was close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. Up close, I could see that it wasn't quite a normal wolf. Its eyes held intelligence far beyond any animal I'd ever encountered. And when it looked at me, I felt like it was seeing into my soul. The wolf sat down facing me and threw back its head in a howl that seemed to go on forever. And suddenly, I could understand what it was saying. Asterisk, welcome, daughter of the night hunter. We have been waiting for you. Asterisk. The alpha wolf's voice in my head was deep and ancient, carrying the weight of centuries. Asterisk. My name is Shadowrunner. I have led this pack for longer than your people have walked these mountains. Your grandmother was our friend. She understood our purpose. Asterisk. What purpose? I asked aloud, feeling strange talking to a wolf. Asterisk. To guard the doorway. To keep the dark spirits from entering your world. The poison your people left in the ground has made our job harder. The barrier grows weak. Asterisk. Images flashed in my mind. Not my own memories, but the wolf's. I saw dolly sods, as it had been centuries ago, when Cherokee hunters came here for vision quests. I saw the first white settlers, the military exercises that left toxic waste in the soil, and the gradual weakening of what Shadowrunner called the barrier. Asterisk. More creatures are coming through every month. We cannot stop them all. We need a human ally. Someone who can walk in both worlds. Asterisk. Both worlds? Asterisk. The world of men and machines, and the world of spirits. Your grandmother could do this. She helped us for many years before she grew old. Now it must be you. Asterisk. I felt overwhelmed. I don't know how. I'm just a park ranger. Asterisk. You are more than that. You carry Cherokee blood. You understand the old ways, even if you have forgotten them. And you have something we need. Asterisk. What's that? Asterisk. Authority in the world of men. You can close the weak places. You can teach your people to respect the sacred boundaries. Asterisk. Before I could respond, Shadowrunner's head snapped up, his ears alert. The other pack members emerged from the forest, all of them focused on something in the distance. Asterisk. They come. Asterisk. Shadowrunner said urgently. Asterisk. A large pack of dark spirits. They seek to establish a permanent crossing point. Asterisk. Where? Asterisk. The bog, where the poison is strongest. If they succeed, your world will be overrun with creatures like the one that attacked the family. Much worse creatures. Asterisk. Shadowrunner stood up, his pack gathering around him. Asterisk. Will you help us? Asterisk. I thought about everything I'd seen over the past week. The protective behavior of the wolves, the violent deaths of animals, the creature that had nearly killed an innocent family. I thought about my grandmother's stories, which I now understood weren't stories at all. I stood up, clutching the spirit bundle Margaret had given me. Tell me what to do. The battle at the bog was like nothing from any ranger manual. The spirit wolves led me through the forest at a run, moving faster than any human should have been able to keep up. But somehow, holding the spirit bundle, I found I could match their pace. We reached the bog just as the dark spirits were emerging. I've seen a lot of wildlife in my career, but these things were nightmare fuel. Some looked like twisted versions of familiar animals. Bears with too many claws, deer with predator teeth, birds with wingspans that blocked out the moon. Others were things that had never existed in our world, shapeless horrors that moved like liquid shadow. There were dozens of them, pouring out of what looked like a crack in the air itself, above the center of the bog. The spirit wolves attacked without hesitation, but they were outnumbered. Asterisk. The bundle. Asterisk. Shadowrunner's voice urged me. Asterisk. Use the bundle to seal the crossing. Asterisk. I looked at the leather pouch in my hands. How? Asterisk. Cherokee magic. Your blood remembers, even if your mind has forgotten. Trust your instincts. Asterisk. One of the dark spirits broke away from the main fight and came straight for me. It looked like a wolf, but wrong. Too many legs, eyes like burning coals, teeth like broken glass. I held up the spirit bundle instinctively, and the creature stopped as if it had hit an invisible wall. The bundle was warm in my hands, then hot. The herbs inside began to glow with a soft blue light. Suddenly, I knew what to do. I opened the bundle and scattered the contents in a circle around myself. The bones and herbs hit the ground and immediately burst into blue flame, creating a ring of sacred fire. The dark spirits recoiled from the light, but they didn't flee. Instead, they began circling, looking for a way through. Asterisk. Now the song, asterisk, Shadowrunner said. Asterisk. Sing the closing song. Asterisk. I don't know any closing song. Asterisk. Your blood knows. Let it speak. Asterisk. I closed my eyes and let instinct take over. Words came to my lips in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Cherokee words my grandmother had sung to me as a child. Words I thought were just meaningless lullabies. They weren't lullabies, they were spells. As I sang, the blue flames grew higher, brighter. The dark spirits began to writhe and shriek, as if the light was painful to them. The crack in the air above the bog started to close. But the dark spirits weren't giving up easily. They rushed the spirit wolves in a final desperate attack, trying to overwhelm them before the portals sealed completely. I watched in horror as several wolves were torn apart by claws and teeth. These were creatures that had protected the sacred places for centuries, dying to keep horrors from invading our world. Shadowrunner fought like a force of nature, his pack rallying around him. But there were too many dark spirits, and the wolves were taking heavy casualties. That's when I made a decision that would change my life forever. I stepped out of the protective circle. The moment I left the sacred fire, the dark spirits turned their attention to me. But I kept singing, even as nightmare creatures raced toward me with murder in their eyes. Asterisk, no, asterisk, Shadowrunner's voice screamed in my mind. Asterisk, stay in the circle, asterisk. But I had finally understood something. The Cherokee words I was singing weren't just a closing spell, they were a binding spell. The singer had to be willing to sacrifice themselves to make it work. My grandmother had known this. She'd prepared me for this moment my entire life. As the dark spirits reached me, I sang the final verse of the binding song. The blue light exploded outward from where I stood, washing over everything. The dark spirits screamed as the light touched them, dissolving like smoke in the wind. The crack in the air slammed shut with a sound like thunder. Then everything went dark. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital in Petersburg, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Jim was sitting next to my bed, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. "Thank God," he said when he saw my eyes open. "I thought we'd lost you." "What happened?" "I found you unconscious in the bog. You'd been missing for 2 days. We had search teams combing the entire wilderness area." I tried to remember the battle with the dark spirits, but it felt like a fading dream. The wolves. "What about them? Are they okay?" Jim looked confused. "Vic, we haven't seen any wolves and dolly sods for 3 days. It's like they all just disappeared." But I knew they hadn't disappeared. They were resting, healing from the battle, waiting for the next time they'd be needed. Margaret Wolf Spirit visited me on my last day in the hospital. She brought flowers and a knowing smile. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Different," I admitted, "like something's changed inside me." "Your grandmother would be proud. You accepted your heritage. You helped the spirit wolves fulfill their purpose. Will I see them again?" Margaret's smile widened. "Daughter, you'll be working with them for the rest of your life. The barrier is sealed for now, but it won't stay that way forever. Dolly Sods needs a guardian who can walk in both worlds." She was right. Over the next few months, I developed new protocols for managing dolly sods. Officially, they were enhanced wildlife protection measures. Unofficially, they were spiritual safeguards designed to keep the barrier between worlds strong. I worked with Cherokee elders to identify other sacred sites that needed protection. I learned the old songs, the old ceremonies, the old ways of communicating with the spirit guardians. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is dark, I hear howling in the distance. Not the howls of ordinary wolves, but the songs of the spirit pack, letting me know they're still out there, still watching, still protecting. My official reports describe unusual wolf behavior patterns and successful wildlife management strategies. The truth is classified in files that will never see the light of day. But I know the real story. I know that there are places in this world where the old magic still works. Places where Cherokee spirit guardians still walk, keeping ancient promises to protect the sacred lands. And I know that my grandmother's stories were never stories at all. They were warnings, preparations, training for the day when I'd need to choose between the world I understood and the world I was born to protect. I chose both. Now, when rangers report unusual wolf activity in wilderness areas throughout Appalachia, I get the call. I pack my equipment and my spirit bundle and I go investigate. Because I've learned that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are the good guys. And sometimes, the most important part of protecting our national parks isn't keeping people out of dangerous areas, it's keeping dangerous things from getting into our world. The spirit wolves taught me that. And they're still teaching me, one howl at a time. My name is Victoria Night Hunter, and I'm a park ranger. But I'm also something more. I'm a guardian of the places where two worlds meet, and I'm never alone in the dark. My name is Ezra Mountain Walker, but folks around here just call me Easy. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, working the Blue Ridge Parkway in Virginia, where the Shenandoah foothills roll into hidden valleys that time forgot. Most days, I help lost hikers and check camping permits. But some days, I hunt for illegal moonshine stills hidden deep in these mountains. It's August 1979, and the heat sits on everything like a wet blanket. The air is so thick you could almost chew it. I'm driving my Ranger truck down Devil's Backbone Ridge, windows rolled down because the AC gave up last month. The radio crackles with static, and I can smell the sweet, sour scent of fermenting corn mash somewhere in the distance. I know that smell better than most folks. My grandfather was Mountain Jack Walker, one of the best moonshiners these hills ever saw. During Prohibition, he could make whiskey so smooth it would make angels weep. Course, that was before my time. I went the other way, joined the ATF first, then became a ranger. Figured I could honor the mountains without breaking the law. The call came in this morning about missing federal agents. 3 ATF boys went up to raid a still operation near Cherokee Creek and never came back. Their radios went dead around midnight, and nobody's heard from them since. The brass wants me to coordinate the search because I know these mountains like the lines on my own hands. I pull up to the staging area where 2 more federal vehicles wait. Agent Morrison gets out of the first car, tall, skinny guy with city shoes that'll be useless on these trails. He's got that look federal agents get when they're trying to act like they're not scared. "Ranger Mountain Walker?" he says, shaking my hand. "We appreciate the local assistance. Can you tell us about the missing team's last known position?" I spread a topographic map on the hood of my truck. They were checking out this area here. I point to a spot where Cherokee Creek bends around a limestone ridge. It's perfect for still operations, good water, hidden from roads, and plenty of caves for storage. Morrison nods, but I can tell he doesn't really understand. City folks see these mountains as just trees and rocks. They don't see the history buried in every hollow, the stories whispered by every stream. "Any idea who's running operations up there?" he asks. "Could be anybody," I say. Moonshining's been in these mountains since before the Revolutionary War. Some families have been making whiskey for 8 generations. They know every cave, every trail, every place to hide a still. What I don't tell him is that my grandfather used to tell stories about Cherokee Creek. He'd talk about hollow spirits that protected the old-time moonshiners, guardian ghosts that would lead revenue agents astray or make their equipment fail. I always figured it was just mountain superstition mixed with too much sampling of his own product. We load up our gear and start hiking. The trail is narrow and steep, winding through thick rhododendron bushes that form natural tunnels. Somewhere in the distance, I hear thunder rolling, but the sky is clear blue. These mountains make their own weather sometimes. About a mile up, we find the first sign of trouble. Agent Morrison's radio starts crackling with voices that sound like they're speaking Cherokee mixed with old-fashioned English. We both stop and listen, but then it goes back to normal static. "Probably just picking up some CB radio chatter," Morrison says, but his voice isn't as steady as it was. I don't answer because I'm looking at something that makes my skin crawl. Fresh boot prints in the mud, but they're walking backwards, like whoever made them was facing the way they came from, not where they were going. That's when I smell it again. That sweet, sour mash smell. But it's stronger now. And there's something else mixed in. Something that reminds me of old churches and medicine bundles my Cherokee friends talk about. Something sacred and dangerous all at once. The thunder rolls again, closer this time, and the wind picks up. But the air doesn't smell like rain. It smells like corn liquor and old smoke and something else I can't quite place. Something that makes me think of my grandfather's stories and wish I'd listened better when he tried to teach me the old ways. We find their campsite just before noon. 3 sleeping bags arranged in a perfect circle, federal equipment stacked neat as church pews, but no sign of the agents anywhere. What makes my blood run cold is how everything's arranged, like somebody took their time to make it look just so. This doesn't make sense, Morrison mutters, kneeling by one of the sleeping bags. Look at this. Their boots are still here, lined up by their packs. Who goes hiking in the mountains without boots? I'm studying the ground around the campsite when I notice something that makes my grandfather's stories start crawling up my spine. The clearing is perfectly round, and there are small stones arranged in a circle around the outside. Not random stones, river rocks, the kind Cherokee medicine men use for ceremonies. Agent Morrison, I call softly. Take a look at this. He comes over and follows my pointing finger to where their radio equipment is set up. The antenna has been bent into a spiral shape, twisted like a piece of art. The metal is warm to the touch, even though it's been sitting in the shade. Equipment malfunction? Morrison suggests, but his voice cracks a little. That's when we hear it, the sound of bubbling liquid coming from deeper in the woods. It's rhythmic, steady, like somebody's running a still. But there's no smoke, no fire, smell, nothing to indicate actual distillation happening. We follow the sound through a maze of rhododendron thickets. The bubbling gets louder, and now there's another sound mixed in, voices talking low and urgent. But when we push through the last wall of green leaves, we find an empty clearing with nothing but an old stone fire ring. The bubbling stops the moment we step into the clearing. Morrison draws his sidearm. This is Federal Agent Morrison, he calls out. If there's anyone here, identify yourself. His words echo off the surrounding trees. But there's no answer. Just the feeling that we're being watched by something that's very interested in our business here. I walk over to the fire ring and kneel down. The stones are warm, and there's fresh ash in the center. But the ashes are white, not gray like wood ash should be. White like bone dust or ground limestone. Easy, Morrison whispers behind me. Look at that. I turn and see what he's pointing at. 20 feet away, clear as day in a patch of soft earth, are 3 sets of boot prints leading away from the clearing. Federal issue boots, size 10, 11, and 12, just like the ones back at the empty campsite. But these prints are walking single file, perfectly spaced, heading straight toward a wall of solid rock. We follow the tracks right up to the limestone cliff face. They don't veer left or right, don't stop or hesitate. They just walk straight into stone and disappear. There has to be a cave entrance, Morrison says, running his hands along the rock wall. Some kind of hidden opening. I help him search, but the rock face is solid. No cracks, no openings, no place where 3 full-grown men could vanish into stone. The tracks just end, like the earth swallowed them whole. That's when I hear my grandfather's voice in my memory, telling me about hollow spirits that could open doors in solid rock for those who knew the old ways. Spirits that protected the traditional crafts and punished those who would destroy them. The thunder rolls again, much closer now, and I feel the first fat raindrops hitting my shoulders. But when I look up, the sky is still clear blue. The rain is falling up from the ground instead of down from the clouds, and it tastes like corn liquor. Morrison is backing away from the cliff face, his gun drawn but shaking in his hands. This is impossible, he keeps saying. This is absolutely impossible. I want to agree with him, but I'm remembering more of my grandfather's stories. About revenue agents who went into the mountains during Prohibition and never came out. About federal raids where the equipment would fail and the officers would lose their way on trails they'd walked 100 times before. About the Cherokee spirits that made a deal with the mountain moonshiners way back in the beginning, protection for the traditional ways in exchange for proper respect and tribute. The rain starts falling harder now, but it's not hitting the trees or the ground, it's just soaking us, like we're standing in a cloud that formed around our bodies. And in that strange rain, I can hear voices speaking Cherokee words I recognize from my childhood. Words that mean trespasser and destroyer and judgment. Morrison's radio crackles to life, and a voice comes through clear as church bells. Agent Morrison, this is Agent Collins. Can you hear me? Morrison grabs the radio with both hands. Collins, where the hell are you? We found your campsite but no sign of you or the others. There's a long pause, then Collins' voice again, but it sounds different. Calmer, almost peaceful. We're safe, Morrison. We're learning. The old spirits are teaching us about proper respect for traditional ways. What are you talking about? Morrison shouts into the radio. What old spirits? Where are you? Another pause. And when Collins speaks again, his voice has changed completely. It sounds older, deeper, like it's coming from the bottom of a well. Tell the federal government to stop sending agents to destroy the traditional crafts. Some laws are newer than the spirits that protect these mountains. The radio goes dead, and Morrison stares at it like it just bit him. I'm staring at the cliff face where the tracks disappear, thinking about my grandfather's last words to me before he died. "Boy," he'd said, "someday you'll have to choose between the law you swore to uphold and the law that's written in the bones of these mountains. When that day comes, remember that spirits don't care about badges. The rain that falls upward stops as suddenly as it started, but now the whole forest feels different. Wrong. Like we've walked into a place that doesn't follow normal rules anymore." Morrison is trying his radio every few minutes, but all he gets is static mixed with what sounds like Cherokee chanting. Every time he keys the mic, the temperature drops about 10 degrees, and our breath starts showing in the summer heat. "We need to get back to base," Morrison says. "Call in a full search and rescue team." But when we try to follow our own tracks back to the campsite, the trail has changed. The rhododendron thickets have grown together, forming walls where there used to be openings. The path we walked on 2 hours ago is now blocked by trees that look like they've been growing here for decades. "This is impossible," Morrison keeps muttering, but I notice he's stopped saying it with conviction. Fear is creeping into his voice. The kind of fear that comes when your brain finally accepts that impossible doesn't mean it's not happening. We push through the green maze for another hour before coming to a clearing I've never seen before. In the center stands a moonshine still that makes my jaw drop. It's huge, bigger than anything I've ever seen, with copper pipes twisted into spiral patterns that hurt to look at. But there's no fire under the boiler, no wood stacked nearby, no sign of anyone operating it. And it's bubbling. The mash in the fermentation barrels is working like it's full of live things. Steam rises from the condensing coils, even though there's no heat source. Clear liquid drips steadily from the collection tube into mason jars that are already half full. "Jesus," Morrison whispers, "how is it running without fire?" I walk closer to examine the equipment. The copper pipes are warm to the touch and humming with some kind of energy I can feel in my bones. The metal is old, really old, but it shows no signs of wear or corrosion. It looks like it was made yesterday and has been running for centuries. That's when I see the offerings. Arranged around the base of the still are traditional Cherokee items: corn husks, tobacco bundles, small clay bowls filled with what looks like cornmeal. Mixed in with them are offerings from mountain culture: wildflowers, smooth river stones, and small carved wooden animals. "Somebody's been maintaining this," I tell Morrison. "These offerings are fresh." "Offerings to who?" he asks. But his voice says he's afraid to know the answer. Before I can respond, we hear footsteps in the woods around us. Slow, deliberate steps, but they're coming from every direction at once. Morrison draws his gun and spins in a circle, trying to cover all angles, but there's nothing to see. Just the sound of boots on leaves, getting closer. The footsteps stop all at once, and the silence is worse than the sound was. Then a voice speaks from somewhere right behind us, so close I can feel breath on the back of my neck. "Federal agents are not welcome here." We spin around, but there's no one there. The voice was deep and old, speaking English with a Cherokee accent and the rhythm of someone who learned to talk in the 1800s. Morrison fires 3 shots into the trees where the voice came from. The gunshots echo off the mountains like thunder, but they don't hit anything solid. No cry of pain, no sound of a body falling, just echoes that go on too long and sound wrong when they come back. "You cannot kill what was never alive in the way you understand," the voice says, and now it's coming from the still itself. "You cannot arrest what has no body. You cannot destroy what is protected by agreements older than your government." The liquid bubbling in the still starts glowing with a soft blue light. The copper pipes begin to sing, actually sing, like wind through a church organ, and in that singing I can hear voices. Dozens of voices, speaking Cherokee and Mountain English and languages I don't recognize. Morrison is backing toward the tree line, his gun empty and useless in his shaking hands. But I stand my ground because something in that chorus of voices sounds familiar, like an echo of my grandfather's voice, mixed in with all the others. "Grandfather?" I call out, feeling foolish but desperate. "Mountain Jack, is that you?" The singing stops. The whole forest goes quiet except for the bubbling of the impossible still. Then one voice separates from the others, speaking with the mountain accent I remember from childhood. Boy, you finally made it to the place I could never show you while I was wearing flesh. My grandfather steps out from behind the still, and he looks exactly like he did when I was 10 years old. Same old overalls, same worn boots, same gentle smile that could charm federal agents or talk a bear out of eating your lunch. But his edges are soft, like he's made of moonlight and memory. Grandfather, I whisper, and all the fear drains out of me at once. Easy, son, you got yourself a choice to make, he says, his voice mixing with the sound of bubbling mash and distant thunder. These federal boys came here to destroy something sacred. The Cherokee spirits and the mountain spirits. We made an agreement a long time ago to protect the traditional ways. Your government doesn't understand that some laws are older than the Constitution. Morrison has dropped his gun and is staring at my grandfather like he's looking at his own death. This isn't real, he keeps saying. Ghosts aren't real. This is some kind of hallucination from bad moonshine vapors. My grandfather chuckles, the same sound he used to make when I'd ask him where thunder comes from. Son, real is whatever's happening to you right now. And what's happening is that you've walked into a place where the old agreements still hold power. He gestures to the still, and I see that it's not just bubbling anymore. The liquid inside is swirling in patterns that look like Cherokee writing, forming symbols that shift and change like living things. Your 3 agent friends, they're safe, grandfather says. They're learning about proper respect for traditional ways. But they can't go back to their old lives, not after what they've seen. They understand now that some things are more important than federal law. Morrison finds his voice. You can't just kidnap federal agents. There will be search teams, helicopters, the whole damn FBI if we don't report back. My grandfather's expression turns sad. Boy, this mountain has been swallowing federal agents for over 100 years. Every time the government tries to destroy the traditional ways, the spirits take their due. It's not kidnapping, it's justice. The still begins to bubble faster, and the blue glow gets brighter. In that light, I can see other figures moving in the woods around us. Cherokee ancestors in traditional dress, mountain pioneers in hand-sewn clothes, and modern people wearing everything from overalls to ATF windbreakers. All of them are spirits. All of them are bound to this place, protecting something the federal government wants to destroy. Easy, my grandfather says, his voice gentle but urgent. You're half Cherokee through your grandmother's line, and half mountain folk through me. You understand both worlds. The spirits are offering you the same choice they offered your 3 agent friends. What choice? I ask, though I think I already know. Join us in protecting the old ways, or try to go back to enforcing laws that violate spiritual sovereignty. But understand, if you choose the federal law, you can't unknow what you've learned here. You can't unsee what you've seen. That kind of knowledge changes a man, whether he wants it to or not. Morrison grabs my arm. Don't listen to him. Easy. This is some kind of psychological warfare. Maybe hallucinogenic drugs in the air. We need to get out of here and call for backup. But I'm looking at my grandfather's gentle eyes, and I'm remembering all the stories he tried to tell me when I was young. Stories I dismissed as moonshine tales and old-timer nonsense. Stories that were actually warnings about this exact moment. The still bubbles louder, and the blue light starts pulsing like a heartbeat. In that rhythm, I can hear the question the spirits are asking. Which law will you serve? The one written in Washington, or the one written in the bones of these mountains? Before I can answer, Morrison breaks and runs. He crashes through the underbrush like a spooked deer, heading back the way we came, or the way he thinks we came, because these mountains don't follow normal geography anymore. Let him go, my grandfather says sadly. He'll find his way out eventually. The spirits don't hold those who can't understand. But I know Morrison won't make it out the same man he was when he came in. Nobody sees what we've seen and goes back to their old life unchanged. My grandfather moves closer, and I can smell the familiar sense of his life. Tobacco and mountain air, and the sweet smell of corn mash working. But underneath that, there's something else. Something that smells like old earth and deep water, and the kind of time that turns rocks into soil. Easy? Let me show you what really happened to your 3 agents, he says. The still's blue glow suddenly flares bright as daylight, and I can see everything. Not just the clearing, but the whole mountain, like I'm looking at it through spirit eyes. I see underground chambers carved by Cherokee hands generations ago, connected by tunnels that follow the natural flow of spring water. And in those chambers, I see Agent Collins and his two partners. They're alive, but they're different. They move with the slow, deliberate grace of people who have learned to see time differently. They're working alongside Cherokee spirits and mountain folk ghosts, tending to underground still operations that produce something far more sacred than illegal whiskey. They're making the traditional Cherokee ceremonial drink, the one my grandfather told me about, the one that connects the living world to the spirit world, the one that federal law calls moonshine because the government doesn't understand the difference between sacred ceremony and illegal alcohol. They volunteered to stay, my grandfather explains. Once they understood what they were really trying to destroy, they couldn't go back to their old jobs. They're learning the proper ways now, learning to protect instead of destroy. But their families, I protest, their lives back in the real world. My grandfather's smile turns sad. Son, this is the real world. That other place, the world of federal laws and government agencies, that's the artificial one. This mountain has been sacred Cherokee territory for thousands of years. The spirits that protect it are older than your constitution, older than your government, older than the idea that some distant authority can tell mountain people how to practice their traditions. The blue light pulses again, and suddenly, I can see the whole history of this place. Cherokee ceremonial sites where sacred drinks were brewed for vision quests and healing rituals. The first mountain settlers, learning the traditional ways and adding their own knowledge. Generations of moonshiners who understood they were carrying on something sacred, even when they forgot the spiritual reasons. And then the federal agents, arriving again and again over the decades to destroy what they didn't understand. Each time, the spirits took their due. Each time, some agents learned the truth and chose to stay. Each time, the mountain protected its own. Now it's your turn to choose, my grandfather says. You can try to go back to being a federal ranger, knowing what you know. You can spend the rest of your life enforcing laws that violate spiritual sovereignty, or you can accept your real heritage and help protect what needs protecting. I think about my 12 years as a ranger, all the time I spent hunting illegal stills without understanding what I was really doing. All the traditional knowledge I ignored because it wasn't in any federal manual. All the Cherokee wisdom I dismissed as superstition because I thought my government badge was more important than my blood heritage. What happens if I stay? I ask. You become a guardian of the traditional ways, my grandfather says. You learn the real history of these mountains. You help other law enforcement officers understand the difference between laws written by politicians and laws written by the spirits of the land itself. And if I leave, his expression becomes grave. You carry the knowledge with you for the rest of your life. Every time you arrest someone for practicing traditional crafts, you'll know you're violating something sacred. Every time federal agents raid a still, you'll wonder if they're destroying a ceremonial site. You'll spend your remaining years caught between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. The still's bubbling grows louder, more urgent. The blue light starts pulsing faster, and I realize it's keeping time with my heartbeat. The spirits are waiting for my decision, but they're not waiting patiently. Thunder rolls across the clear sky, and this time it's real thunder. Storm clouds are gathering from nowhere, building into towering thunderheads that block out the sun. In the distance, I can hear helicopters approaching, the federal backup Morrison requested before we lost radio contact. They're coming to destroy this place, my grandfather says. Federal agents with warrants and authority and no understanding of what they're about to violate. If you choose to stay, you can help us protect the sacred sites. If you choose to leave, you'll have to watch us defend ourselves against your former colleagues. The helicopters are getting closer, and I can hear the sound of vehicles on the mountain roads below. A full federal task force, coming to investigate the missing agents and destroy whatever illegal operations they find. They have no idea they're about to violate Cherokee spiritual sovereignty and attack sacred ceremonial sites that have been protected by spirits for centuries. Grandfather, I say, my voice barely audible over the approaching storm and aircraft. If I stay, can I still help people? Can I still protect these mountains? His smile is like sunrise after a long night. Son, you'll be protecting these mountains in ways you never imagined. You'll be saving federal agents from making the same mistakes your 3 friends almost made. You'll be preserving traditional knowledge that's been under attack for over a century. I look at the impossible still, bubbling without fire and glowing with spiritual energy. I think about Agent Collins and his partners, learning the true history of what they tried to destroy. I think about the Cherokee ancestors who made agreements with mountain spirits to preserve their traditional ways against government interference. And I think about Morrison, crashing through the woods, carrying knowledge that will haunt him for the rest of his life. The helicopters are almost overhead now, and I can see federal agents rappelling down ropes, armed and ready to assault what they think is just another illegal moonshine operation. They're about to learn the difference between federal law and spiritual sovereignty. I look at my grandfather one last time, seeing him clearly for what he is, not just a ghost, but a guardian of traditional knowledge, a protector of sacred ways, a bridge between the Cherokee spiritual world and the mountain folk culture that learned from it. I choose to stay, I say. The blue light explodes outward like a solar flare, and everything changes. When the light fades, I'm still standing in the clearing, but everything else is different. The impossible still has vanished, replaced by a traditional Cherokee ceremonial fire circle. My grandfather is gone, but I can feel his presence in the smoke that rises from the sacred flames. Most importantly, I can see the federal agents repelling toward us. But now I understand what they really are. Not invaders, but lost souls who need guidance to understand the truth about this place. The first agent touches down 50 feet away, automatic rifle ready, scanning for targets. When he sees me standing calmly by the fire circle, he approaches with professional caution. "Ranger Mountain Walker, I'm Agent Patterson, Federal Task Force. We're here about your missing colleagues. Are you injured?" I look at him, this young federal agent who has no idea what he's stumbled into, and I feel a deep sadness for all the law enforcement officers who spend their careers enforcing laws they don't understand. "I'm fine, Agent Patterson," I say, "but we need to talk about what's really going on up here." Over the next hour, I explain what I can. I tell them about the sacred Cherokee sites that have been misidentified as illegal still operations. I explain the difference between ceremonial brewing and commercial moonshine. I help them understand that some of these mountains are protected by spiritual sovereignty that predates federal jurisdiction. I don't mention the spirits directly. That knowledge has to be earned, not given. But I plant the seeds of understanding that might help them avoid the same confrontation my 3 missing colleagues encountered. Agent Patterson listens with the skeptical attention of a professional law enforcement officer. But I can see something changing in his expression when I show him the traditional offering circles, when I explain the Cherokee history of these particular sites, when I demonstrate the difference between sacred ceremony and illegal alcohol production. "What about the missing agents?" he asks. "They're safe," I tell him, which is the truth. They discovered that this operation was more complicated than initial reports suggested. They're working on a cultural liaison approach that respects both federal authority and traditional practices. It's not the whole truth, but it's enough truth for now. Agent Collins and his partners are safe, learning the traditional ways from Cherokee spirits and mountain folk ghosts. They're becoming guardians like me, protectors of knowledge that has survived government persecution for over a century. Patterson coordinates with his team, and they conduct a thorough search of the area. But they find no illegal stills, no evidence of commercial moonshine production, no violations of federal law. Just sacred Cherokee sites and traditional ceremonial areas that are protected under religious freedom laws. As the federal task force prepares to leave, Patterson pulls me aside. "Ranger Mountain Walker, there's something I need to ask you. My equipment has been malfunctioning ever since we arrived. Compass readings are off, radio communications are spotty, and my men report feeling like they're being watched. Any explanation for that?" I look at this young agent, seeing myself 12 years ago, full of federal authority and confidence in government law, with no understanding of the deeper currents that flow through these ancient mountains. "Agent Patterson," I say carefully, "these mountains are old. Cherokee people have considered them sacred for thousands of years. Sometimes, sacred places have effects on modern equipment that we don't fully understand. The important thing is to approach them with respect." He nods, but I can see he's not entirely satisfied with that answer. That's good. Unsatisfied questions are what lead people to deeper understanding. After the federal team leaves, I stay in the clearing as evening approaches. The traditional fire burns down to glowing coals, and in those coals, I see my grandfather's face one more time. "You did good, boy," his voice says in the crackling of burning wood. Those agents will remember what you taught them. Some of them will start asking questions about the difference between federal law and spiritual sovereignty. That's how change happens. One person at a time, one question at a time. Over the following months, my work changes completely. I become a cultural liaison between federal agencies and Cherokee traditional practitioners. I help law enforcement understand the difference between illegal commercial operations and sacred ceremonial activities. I train other rangers to recognize protected sites and approach them with proper respect. And sometimes, when federal agents get too aggressive in their enforcement actions, I guide them to the places where they can learn the deeper truths about these mountains. Places where the spirits still teach those who are ready to learn. Agent Morrison never filed a report about what he experienced that day. He transferred to a desk job in Washington and never worked field operations again. But sometimes I get letters from him, asking questions about Cherokee history and traditional practices. The knowledge he gained in these mountains haunts him, but it's also changing him. Agent Collins and his partners are officially listed as having accepted long-term undercover assignments. Their families receive their paychecks and regular communications. But the truth is, they've become something new. Federal agents who understand that some laws are older and more important than others. As for me, I've found my real purpose. I protect these mountains not just from illegal activities, but from well-meaning law enforcement officers who don't understand what they're dealing with. I preserve traditional knowledge while helping both Cherokee and mountain folk communities navigate the modern legal system. And on quiet nights, when the moon is dark and the mist rises from the valleys, I can hear the spirits still working. The sacred stills bubble in hidden chambers, producing ceremonial drinks that connect the living world to the world of spirits. The traditional ways continue, protected by agreements that are older than any government and stronger than any federal law. The mountains keep their secrets, but they also keep their promise to protect those who honor the old ways. And I've learned that some kinds of law enforcement require understanding not just federal statutes, but the deeper laws written in the bones of the earth itself. My name is Ezra Mountain Walker, and I guard the places where two worlds meet. It's not the job I thought I wanted, but it's the job these mountains needed me to do. And in the distance, thunder rolls across clear skies, reminding me that the spirits are still watching, still protecting, still teaching those who are willing to learn.